Chapter 61. It was almost late at night. The number 1 villa area of Huading Special Operations Bureau was still brightly lit. There were 9 detached villas in the number 1 villa area, which could be said to be the most luxurious place in the whole base. It was the residence of the senior officials and VIPs of Huading Special Operations Bureau, located in the center of the whole base. Even though it was in the wilderness, living in a villa was also a kind of enjoyment. Tan Qinghua, the deputy commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations, temporarily lived in the 9th building of the number 1 villa area. As a military general of the Prince Group, Tan Qinghua, who was in his early 50s, was thin and old with age spots on his face. His undyed hair was gray. He didn't look like a general with real power who had just turned 50, but more like an ordinary old man in his 60s or 70s. It was said that when Tan Qinghua was young, he was also a member of the special warfare system of Jianghu state. At his peak he was even an expert close to the thunder-shocking realm. However, he was captured by foreign forces during a mission and suffered all kinds of tortures for half a month. His martial arts strength, which was absolutely not weak, was destroyed, and his body also fell ill, which hadn't improved for many years. However, this general of Jianghu state was extremely tenacious. After being successfully rescued, he transferred from the special warfare system to the General Staff headquarters to be a civilian officer. In nearly 20 years he worked steadily and rose to the top several times, and finally sat in his current position. His life was almost a living legend, full of ups and downs, forbearance and wisdom. He was definitely a famous figure in the military and the special warfare system of Jianghu state. The lights in the villa were very bright. The almost dazzling light covered every corner of the villa, making everyone's eyes a little uncomfortable. But no one present said anything. Everyone just quietly looked at Tan Qinghua, who was sitting on the sofa, carefully. Tan Qinghua sat quietly on the sofa, expressionless. In front of him was a stretcher covered with a clean and tidy white cloth. Under the white cloth was the body of his son, Tan Shilai. Tan Qinghua had 2 sons. His eldest son did not know martial arts and was now serving as a staff officer in a division of the Southern Theater of Operations. He was the deputy regimental commander and had a bright future ahead of him. Tan Qinghua's youngest son was Tan Qinghua, who had been practicing martial arts since he was a child. When he grew up, he was sent to the Azura path by Tan Qinghua, who had strict requirements for him. Tan Qinghua had high hopes for his 2 sons, one of whom was a scholar, while the other was a martial artist. Tan Qinghua had high hopes for them, especially Tan Shilai, who was strong-willed, talented, and quick-witted. He had always been regarded as a successor by Tan Qinghua. The relationship between father and son was excellent. In Tan Qinghua's mind, Tan Shilai could be said to be the only and best choice to support the Tan family in the future. But now, his biological son, whom he had high hopes for, was lying silently on a stretcher and had become a lifeless corpse. The white-haired person sends the black-haired person off. How painful was it? No one could understand Tan Qinghua's feelings. Even Tan Qinghua himself did not know what he was feeling right now. The moment he received the bad news, his entire heart felt empty. There was no anger, no resentment, no sorrow. Numbness seemed to be the only thing he felt. He just sat on the sofa, and as time passed he didn't want to move, he didn't want to speak, and he didn't want to do anything. Old Tan. Near Tan Qinghua, a middle-aged man in camouflage clothes called out. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He was about the same age as Tan Qinghua, but his image was completely different. He was a tall and straight man with black hair and a dignified look. The 2 golden stars on his shoulders, which represented the status of a lieutenant general, looked more dazzling under the light. But at this moment he looked at Tan Qinghua with an extremely careful expression and a very soft voice. Tan Qinghua, who had been sitting on the sofa for a few hours, finally moved. But he did not raise his head. He just slowly knelt in front of Tan Shilai's body and slowly reached out his hand. His hands were trembling violently. His skinny fingers clenched the white cloth tightly and slowly pulled it down. Tan Shilai's pale and livid face gradually appeared in front of everyone. Tan Shilai looked at him silently. He opened his mouth, but for a moment he could not make a sound. Old Tan, the lieutenant general in camouflage clothes nearby, took a step forward and couldn't help calling out again. Tan Qinghua looked up blankly. He twitched the corner of his mouth and said in a hoarse voice, "Changjiang, my son was killed." In the entire Huading, there was only one lieutenant general named Changjiang. He was Lieutenant General Gu Changjiang, the director of the Huading Special Operations Bureau, one of the elders of Kunlun City and the backbone of the entire Special Warfare Group. Gu Changjiang and Tan Qinghua had been friends for many years and had a good personal relationship. Now, seeing the desolation and confusion in his old friend's eyes, he also felt bad. But no matter how bad it was, he did not dare to act rashly. Everything that happened tonight was a bit weird. Not only was Tan Shilai killed, but also the young master of the Zhong family, Zhong Xiaofeng, was completely disabled. Gu Changjiang did not get specific information because it happened so soon. According to the latest news, Zhong Xiaofeng was still being rescued. Whether he could get out of danger or not depended entirely on his luck. However, these two incidents were done by the same group of young people. Moreover, they were done by a group of young people with extremely complicated backgrounds. Gu Changjiang could not figure out the nature of the matter for the time being. How could he dare to act rashly? He had a good personal relationship with Tan Shilai, but it was just a personal relationship after all. Their positions were not exactly the same. The Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group had been advancing and retreating together in recent years. They were the closest allies, but allies were completely different from their own people. The difference between them was neither big nor small. Take what happened tonight as an example. If Gu Changjiang insisted on standing up for Tan Shilai now, it meant that the Special Warfare Group had intervened in this matter before the Prince Group made a clear response. In this way, not to mention the reaction of the Special Warfare Group, even the Prince Group would not appreciate it. Before getting the approval from the top, the only thing Gu Changjiang could do was to say a word of condolence to Tan Qinghua. Don't be too sad. Gu Changjiang hesitated for a moment and walked to Tan Qinghua. He patted him on the shoulder and said in a low voice, Shilai doesn't want to see you like this either. You can't see it. Tan Qinghua said in a dull tone, he's gone. How can you see it? Gu Changjiang wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Tan Qinghua did not look at him. He gently stroked his son's cold face and said with a soft look in his eyes, we had lunch together at noon. Who would have thought that things would suddenly turn out like this at night? You're very talented and smart since you were young. You're much better than your brother. Originally, I was counting on you to take over my position, but I didn't expect you to leave without saying a word. You're really ruthless. I've always told you about a sense of responsibility and a man's responsibility, but you've turned a deaf ear to it. I've noticed your bad habit of holding a grudge a long time ago, but I didn't take it seriously. It's not a bad thing to hold a grudge. If someone dares to do us wrong, we must pay them back. But you are so stupid. You want to take revenge when you don't have the strength. In the end, you have to ask me to take revenge for you. What the hell is this? Tan Qinghua knelt beside Tan Shilai's body and gently bent down to kiss his son's cold forehead. He said softly, don't worry. Dad will take revenge for you soon. Gu Changjiang's expression changed slightly. A young man a little further away from Gu Changjiang and Tan Qinghua also changed his expression slightly. The young man was about 32 or 33 years old and wore a pair of glasses. Although he was wearing a military uniform, he exuded a refined temperament that belonged to a civil servant. Rather than calling him a soldier, it would be more appropriate to describe him as a scholar. Hearing Tan Qinghua's hoarse and calm but firm promise, the young man touched his glasses and said softly, Commander Tan, I'm sorry for your loss. Tan Qinghua raised his eyelids and glanced at him. In a short time he seemed to have completely calmed down. This general of the Prince Group sat back on the sofa and stared at the young man in front of him. He said indifferently, Who killed Shilai? Here's the thing, let me ask you who killed Shilai. Tan Qinghua directly interrupted him and repeated in a calm tone. The young man with glasses opened his mouth and didn't know how to answer for a moment. Who killed Tan Shilai? Everyone present knew the answer to this question, including Tan Qinghua. But because of his identity, the young man couldn't say it. Because he was the secretary of Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations, and Ning Ziyuan was Ning Qianqing's father. If he really told Ning Ziyuan who the murderer was, Ning Ziyuan would probably be in a passive position. Tan Qinghua's question was a bit heart-wrenching. Commander Tan, we are all very sorry that such a thing happened. Commander Ning hopes that you can calm down and that he will give you a satisfactory explanation. He hopes that you can focus on the overall situation and not affect your work. If it's convenient for Commander Tan, Commander Ning has something to discuss with you about work. The young man said calmly while carefully observing Tan Qinghua's reaction. This was the main purpose of his visit today. It was more to find an opportunity to see if he could ease the relationship between the two sides than to express his condolences. Ning Qianqing killed Tan Shilai. To put it simply, it was a grudge between two young people. To put it simply, it was a grudge between two powerful figures in the Eastern Theater of Operations. The pain of losing a son seemed to be irreconcilable. But at their level, there was basically nothing that they couldn't talk about. The key was how important Tan Shilai was to Tan Qinghua. Tan Qinghua looked up at the young man in front of him and gradually narrowed his eyes. The extremely depressing atmosphere in the hall instantly became heavy. In less than 10 seconds, the young man's forehead was covered with cold sweat, and his calm expression gradually became embarrassed. He was just an ordinary lieutenant colonel. It was conceivable how much pressure he was under the gaze of a general. "Please tell Commander Ning for me." Tan Qinghua finally opened his mouth and said faintly, "I will focus on the overall situation after I avenge my son." The young lieutenant colonel's expression changed. Looking at Tan Qinghua's eyes that were gradually becoming crazy, he finally chose to remain silent. "Changjiang, where is the murderer?" Tan Qinghua suddenly stood up and looked at Gu Changjiang beside him and asked. "Yonghua Villa." Gu Changjiang was stunned and answered subconsciously. "Raging fire." As soon as Gu Changjiang finished his words, Tan Qinghua suddenly raised his voice and shouted, "Here!" Outside the villa, a loud voice sounded. The door was pushed open, and a burly man with a scar on his face appeared at the door and saluted Tan Qinghua. Tan Qinghua said coldly, "Gather people. The destination is Yonghua Villa. Bring the murderer back to me." He clenched his hands and added, "At all costs." "Yes." The scarred man with the code name Raging Fire saluted and turned to go out without hesitation. "Commander Tan." The young lieutenant colonel, who had been silent, changed his face and said in a low voice, "Do you know what you are doing?" "I am avenging my son." Tan Qinghua's tone was cold. "Tell Ning Ziyuan that if he has a different opinion he can stop my people and see if he has the guts." The young lieutenant colonel's face changed. After a while, he snorted coldly and turned to leave quickly. He was just Ning Ziyuan's secretary and could not make any decisions for Ning Ziyuan. Now that things had come to this point, he must report Tan Qinghua's actions to Ning Ziyuan as soon as possible. "Old Tan, calm down. Things are not simple tonight." Gu Changjiang came behind Tan Qinghua and said in a low voice. This time, the maneuver between the Eastern Theater of Operations and Huading Special Operations Bureau was not large. About 2,000 elites from the Eastern Theater of Operations came. Although the number was not large, their comprehensive quality was the top 2,000 people in the entire Eastern Theater of Operations. Among these people, Tan Qinghua could fully command about 300 people. Once these 300 people rushed into Yonghua Villa, things were likely to develop to the point of no return. Everything looked a little chaotic tonight. Tan Qinghua's rash actions might not have an optimistic result. "I can't calm down." Tan Qinghua glanced at Gu Changjiang and said calmly, "Changjiang, I know your difficulties so I won't embarrass you. But don't stop me. I will kill whoever kills my son. I will kill whoever dares to stop me." Crazy. Tan Qinghua was crazy. Gu Changjiang's brain was buzzing. He frowned tightly and felt powerless. Tan Qinghua ignored Gu Changjiang. He just bent down slightly, held his son's body in his arms and went straight upstairs. Gu Changjiang stood where he was in a daze. After a long while he took out a cigarette and lit it. He took a big drag but his mind became more and more confused. Tan Shilai's body was sent back by Gu Yulan. Time was pressing so he only had a brief understanding of what had happened. Not to mention the development of the matter, the people involved tonight were enough to make people feel that the inside story of this matter was complicated. Zhuang Huayang, Qin Weibai, Wang Yuetong, Ning Chenqing, Li Beidian, and Li Tianlan. Gu Changjiang was not familiar with Li Tianlan, but it was too obvious what the others meant. The academics, the Wang family of Beihai, the giant group, Mount Shu, and the mysterious Samsara Palace. Especially the foreign force Samsara Palace. Although its development in Zhongzhou State had been resisted by Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai, Zhongzhou State had cooperated with Samsara Palace several times in recent years, and they had been very happy. Now Qin Weibai, who had a special status in Samsara Palace, appeared as Li Tianlan's woman. It was said that she even forced He Qingting, the mad dog of the Zhong family, to kneel on the spot. Did Qin Weibai suddenly become so strong? Gu Changjiang had a headache. He felt that a storm was coming to Huading, and there was a dark cloud hanging over the city overnight. Suddenly the phone rang. Gu Changjiang took out his mobile phone and looked at the caller ID. Suddenly he felt refreshed. After picking up the phone, he respectfully called the governor. There were two extremely prominent governors in Zhongzhou State, but only one could make Gu Changjiang so respectful. Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou State and the governor of Kunlun City. Huading is very lively tonight? Gu Xingyun's voice sounded on the phone. His voice was light and no one could tell his mood. It's more than lively. Gu Changjiang said with a wry smile. It's a mess. The boy of the Ning family killed Tan Shilai, and the youngest son of the Zhong family, Zhong Xiaofeng, was disabled by a man named Li Tianlan. It hasn't been long and all kinds of bad guys have jumped out one by one. Old Tan is also crazy. A few minutes ago he was ready to gather people to take revenge. It's really chaotic. Gu Xingyun chuckled and said lightly, but it's good. Gu Changjiang was silent for a while. It's good? The chaos in Huading was indeed not a bad thing for Kunlun City. But the current chaos was not caused by Kunlun City. In this way the muddy waters of Huading were shallow and they were not sure. Would it really be in the interest of Kunlun City to get into the water rashly? You go and have a look. Gu Xingyun seemed to think for a moment and then said slowly, listen more and talk less. Wait and see. Yes. Gu Changjiang answered in a deep voice and then said in a low voice, Governor, should we make early preparations? Gu Xingyun was silent for a while. After half a minute, he said with a smile, the preparations have been made for a long time, but there's no rush to take action. The situation of Huading depends on the Zhong family. Tan Qinghua alone can't make it. Let's wait and see first. Gu Changjiang said yes and hung up the phone. He stood on the spot and smoked a cigarette, then walked out of the villa directly. At 12 o'clock at night. In the brightly lit base of Huading Special Operations Bureau, 7 or 8 military trucks roared out of the gate of the base and rushed into the deep night outside the base. Tan Qinghua, who had originally asked the guard Lai Hua to lead the team to catch those people, changed his mind at the last minute. He put his son's body in his bedroom and personally led the team to Yonghua Villa. In the number 1 villa area, the 9th building was quiet. In the number 7 villa where Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations, was also quiet. Chapter 62. When they got back to the downtown area and approached Yonghua Villa, Li Beidian and others couldn't believe that they got down from Mount Tong so easily. Li Tianlan didn't think it was a big deal. After all, he didn't know much about the Six in Zhongzhou State and didn't know the strength of the Six. In his view, Zhuang Huayang, an important figure in the academics, had shown up in person. Plus Qin Weibai, the spokesperson of a big shot. It would be a piece of cake to bring them down. But Li Beidian didn't think so. Not only him but Ning Qianqing and Wang Yuatong all looked serious along the way. Obviously, they thought it was abnormal that they got down from the mountain so easily. The Prince Group was the last ruling group. Now it was the 3rd year of the general change, and it hadn't reached the midterm change yet. During this period, the Prince Group could be said to be in its heyday. On paper, it was even stronger than the current ruling group, the academics. Zhong Yongming of the Zhong family was currently the most promising figure to become the new leader of the Prince Group. His favorite youngest son was disabled, so it wouldn't be surprising for this power figure to react violently. But everything was calm tonight, and Zhong Yongming didn't even show up. This matter was obviously a little too abnormal. Such abnormality could only mean that the Zhong family's subsequent revenge would be more brutal. The top leader of Huading was different from other senior officials. Historically, the top leader of Huading had to enter the decision-making committee. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was the leader of the whole Zhongzhou state. Zhongzhou state had the largest bureaucratic system in the world, but there were no more than 20 members in the decision-making committee, including several power giants. This was the real top authority. If such a person insisted on retaliating against someone, there would be no place for him in Zhongzhou state, not to mention Huading. The Zhong family's unusual calm tonight didn't mean safety, but a more dangerous follow-up. What are you thinking about? The atmosphere doesn't feel right. Zhuang Huayang sat in the car and felt the solemn atmosphere in the car. He suddenly smiled and said in a relaxed tone. They were now sitting in the car heading for Yonghua Villa. Except for Han Xinyan and Zhang Holong, everyone else was there. The car was extended, more than 6 meters long, and the seats were arranged vertically facing each other. The space was very large and it was not a problem to seat a few more people. After taking Li Tianlan and others down from Mount Tong, Zhuang Huayang's original intention was to take these excellent freshmen back to the Sky Academy. Everything that happened tonight was a big trouble anywhere. Only the Sky Academy was safe. Zhuang Huayang was one of the top 10 contemporary experts in Zhongzhou State, and he was also the headmaster of the Sky Academy. It was not easy for Zhong Yongming or Tan Qinghua to take revenge easily. At most, they could only instigate some students to take revenge. With the strength of Li Tianlan and others, Zhuang Huayang did not have to worry too much. However, Qin Weibai didn't want Li Tianlan to go back so early. Zhuang Huayang had lived for so long, so he could see that the young couple was in love now. It was reasonable that they didn't want to separate. So after a little hesitation, he accepted Qin Weibai's suggestion and came to Yonghua Villa. Qin Weibai was backed by the Samsara Palace. The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City could be said to be vigilant against this mysterious foreign force. Even the government of Zhongzhou State did not welcome their development in the country. But in the past few years, the Samsara Palace did solve some things that were difficult for Zhongzhou State to do. No matter which group it was, they had to show some respect to the Samsara Palace. Even if the Zhong family and the Tan family went crazy for revenge, there were still 2 or 3 supermasters following Qin Weibai from the Samsara Palace. If they really fought, Qin Weibai would not be at a disadvantage. This was probably why she had the confidence to keep Li Tianlan and the others. But Zhuang Huayang was still a little worried, so he got in the car with them. He couldn't be blamed for being cautious. The chips Li Tianlan threw out were too lethal. When he was on the phone with the bureau chief, he threw out the chips Li Tianlan gave. The bureau chief, who had always been calm, sounded as if he didn't know who Zhong Yongming was at all. He ordered Zhuang Huayang to protect Li Tianlan and almost sent his guards over. Zhuang Huayang naturally knew why. A 17-year-old thunder-shocking realm expert represented too many things. Under normal circumstances, no matter how talented a person was, it was impossible for him to reach the thunder-shocking realm at the age of 17. It wasn't because he didn't have enough talent, but because the physical strength of a 17-year-old couldn't accommodate the power of the thunder-shocking realm. Martial artists had high or low talent, but their physical strength was almost the same. At least, before the human bones and muscles were completely formed, that was, before the age of 20, no one could bear the powerful power of the thunder-shocking realm. Before adulthood, even if one had the talent to enter the thunder-shocking realm, once he entered the thunder-shocking realm, the extreme power would instantly destroy the relatively tender bones and muscles of the martial artist, unless the physical strength of the martial artist had reached the requirement of the power of the thunder-shocking realm. According to some confidential information of Zhongzhou State, in the past 100 years, the earliest martial artist to reach the thunder-shocking realm was 23 years old, which was after the muscles and bones were completely formed. Coincidentally, the person who kept this record was also from Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun. He was the god of war of Zhongzhou State 200 years ago. It was extremely difficult to improve the physical strength effectively and quickly, but it was not absolute. At least when Zhuang Huayang was young, he once heard from a big shot who had passed away that there was a legendary essence of martial arts in the map of God of War inherited from Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun, which could improve the physical strength relatively quickly. No one had seen the true face of that essence, but it was said that it was the essence that several gods of war of Zhongzhou State from Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun commented with a wry smile as the strongest and most useless essence. That essence was called the Invincible Manual. Zhuang Huayang did not know what was so useless about the Invincible Manual, but he knew what the word strongest meant in Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun. Li Tianlan, who practiced the Invincible Manual, entered the thunder-shocking realm at the age of 17, which was enough to explain the problem. Once such a person entered the invincible realm in the future, and he even had the wind and thunder veins, what would happen? Protect Li Tianlan to the death. When saying this, the chief did not hesitate at all. This was almost the consensus of the whole academics. So feeling the atmosphere in the car at this time, Zhuang Huayang smiled again and said, "Don't worry, it's okay." His eyes glanced around and finally stopped on Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai. It was a very spacious car, but Qin Weibai was half leaning in Li Tianlan's arms. The two were very close to each other and they seemed to be whispering. Zhuang Huayang felt helpless. Looking at the two little lovers, they were not worried at all. It seemed that only Li Beidian and the others were worried. "Headmaster, the reaction of the Zhong family tonight is too abnormal. Something is not right." Ning Chenxing leaned on the seat and coughed. He did not know what the powder Li Tianlan poured into his mouth was, but how could it be ordinary if it was carried by the little princess of the Wang family? So now Ning Chenxing's injury had stabilized. Although there was still a long way to go before he could fully recover, at least he could move slowly. "I think so too." Wang Yuatong frowned and said, "Zhong Xiaofeng is very important in the Zhong family. Among Zhong Yongming's 3 children, the eldest one is dedicated to business. Although his daughter has entered the officialdom, she is still a daughter. Zhong Yongming has always regarded Zhong Xiaofeng as the political successor of the Zhong family. But now such a big thing has happened and Zhong Yongming can be so calm. He doesn't show up himself and even his secretary doesn't show up. This is too strange. Today is the 30th, right? Qin Weibai, who was leaning in Li Tianlan's arms, suddenly said in a somewhat lazy tone. Wang Yuetong was stunned. She seemed to understand something, but she did not speak. She just pursed her lips and turned her head. The 30th? Li Beidian and Ning Qianqing were stunned at the same time. Then they nodded and said, "It's the end of the month." No wonder. For most people, the end of the month was not unusual. But for the top officials, if there were no particularly important foreign affairs or other arrangements, Jianghu State would hold a plenary meeting of the decision-making committee at the end of each month and at the beginning of each month. As a member of the decision-making committee of Jianghu State, Zhong Yongming would definitely go to Yuzhou for the meeting if there were no other important matters. That was to say, Zhong Yongming was not in Huading at all these days. What a coincidence. Li Beidian was silent for a while and said with a smile, "Then we are safe, aren't we? Zhong Yongming will come back in 2 or 3 days. What can he do to us when we enter the Sky Academy? It's not fun to be a coward. We can't hide in the Sky Academy forever, can we?" Li Tianlan, who had been paying attention to Qin Weibai, suddenly opened his mouth. He was talking to Li Beidian, but his eyes inadvertently glanced at Zhuang Huayang. Zhuang Huayang was calm and silent. He understood what Li Tianlan meant, but it was not convenient for him to express his position. The academic's influence on Huading was relatively weak. Even if he wanted to do something, he could not do anything. Now his bottom line was to protect Li Tianlan. As for what to do next, it depended on the development of the situation. If there was a chance, the academics would not be polite. "It's not the right time to talk about this," Qin Weibai suddenly said with a soft and calm expression. "The trouble has just begun. The Zhong family's revenge will come sooner or later, and we can't avoid it. But because Zhong Yongming is not in Huading now, we can let him calm down during this period. As long as Zhong Xiaofeng is not dead, there is room for negotiation. At least there is some hope for a superficial reconciliation. Before Zhong Yongming comes back, we should guard against Tan Qinghua." Tan Qinghua. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and repeated the name. Indeed, now it seemed that Tan Qinghua's possible reaction was the key. Although Zhuang Huayang did not say it at Mount Tong, Li Tianlan could see that he was a little nervous. Later, he asked him and found out that Zhuang Huayang was also worried about Tan Qinghua's reaction. Compared with Zhong Xiaofeng's status in the Zhong family, Tan Xilai's status in the Tan family was higher. It was said that Tan Qinghua had high hopes for him, but he was killed by Ning Qianqing tonight. Who knew what the military hardliners would do? It was said that 2,000 elites of the Eastern Theater of Operations were now in Huading, preparing for the maneuver with the Special Operations Bureau in Huading in a few days. If Tan Qinghua insisted on revenge, he could surround Mount Tong with his men, and even Zhuang Huayang would find it difficult to deal with him. Li Tianlan lit a cigarette and thought about it. How will Tan Qinghua react? He subconsciously glanced at Ning Qianqing and subconsciously shook his head at the thought of the grudge between him and the Tan family. How will a man who can endure being cuckolded react? Will Zhong Yongming and Tan Qinghua reach a tacit understanding? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Tonight's events were two things, but there was nothing wrong with linking them together. Zhong Yongming was now in Yuzhou for a meeting, but Tan Qinghua was in Huading. For them, the murderers were all in the same gang. If the two reached a tacit understanding, it could almost represent the military and political sides of Huading to a certain extent. Tan Qinghua was the deputy commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations. The headquarters of the Eastern Theater of Operations was in Jinling, but Huading was also under the jurisdiction of the Eastern Theater of Operations. The Tan family was originally one of the wealthy families that entered Huading with the Zhong family and had a great influence in the military of Huading. Once the two reached a tacit understanding, who knew what would happen? Li Tianlan subconsciously glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai's delicate face was also a little hesitant, but she did not say anything. "Boss Qin, you brought us here tonight. You must have a countermeasure, right?" Zhuang Huayang suddenly asked. "We'll deal with whatever comes our way. Everything will be fine after a few days." Qin Weibai moved in Li Tianlan's arms and said flatly, "What if we can't get through these days?" Zhuang Huayang stared at Qin Weibai and asked. This young girl seemed to be a little too confident. Now the six would indeed give Samsara Palace some face, but giving face did not mean a bottomless compromise. Samsara Palace had almost no power in Jianghu State. Once the Prince Group insisted on attacking Li Tianlan and joined forces with Kunlun City, how could Qin Weibai protect Li Tianlan? If they ignored the Samsara Palace that could not enter Jianghu State, Qin Weibai could hardly do anything. Qin Weibai sat up straight and glanced at Zhuang Huayang. Her voice was still calm and languid. She said softly, "Samsara is nothing in Jianghu state, but the deputy commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations cannot trample on its dignity." The corner of Li Baitian's mouth twitched quietly. He secretly glanced at Qin Weibai and did not dare to say anything. Who could have thought that this little woman, who looked calm and harmless at this time, was so powerful on the mountain just now? Faced with hundreds of policemen, she was the first to use her gun and the first to shoot. No one believed that Qin Weibai dared to shoot, not even he Qing Ting, the deputy director of Huading Police Station, whose head was pointed at by her with a gun. So when Qin Weibai asked her to kneel down, she just sneered and said, "Shoot if you can." Then Qin Weibai did shoot. Without saying a word, she directly pulled the trigger at her head. Without the slightest bit of hesitation, he was so decisive that everyone was dumbfounded. At the critical moment, if he Qing Ting had not knelt down because she felt that Qin Weibai's finger was really pulling the trigger, the shot pointed at her head would have completely blown her head off. Even so, the shot brushed past her scalp. It was a brush with death. Deputy Director He, who was kneeling on the ground to avoid the bullet, could not say a word at that time. With her head full of blood, she just knelt on the ground and did not dare to move for a long time, as if she was scared silly. Li Baidian had lived for so many years, but it was the first time that he saw such a domineering woman. A pure queen. Li Tianlan disabled Zhong Xiaofeng because of a word. Qin Weibai dared to kill He Qing Ting because of a word. Chapter 63. The limousine drove into the Yonghua Villa district and finally stopped at the gate of Qin Weibai's detached villa. They got out of the car one by one. When they walked into the villa, Qin Weibai looked back at Li Baidian and Ning Qianqing, and then at Wang Yuetong with a playful look. She said softly, "The guest rooms on the second floor are ready. You can choose any room you like." She looked at Zhuang Huayang again and continued, "Headmaster, if you don't mind, how about spending the night here?" "I'm fine with you." Zhuang Huayang nodded with a smile and looked at Li Tianlan. This guy was the treasure of the academics now, and he was really worried about leaving him here. "Then I'll go to rest with Tianlan." Qin Weibai glanced at Wang Yuetong intentionally or unintentionally, and then reached out to hold Li Tianlan's arm with a smile that seemed to melt people's hearts. Wang Yuetong bit her lip and said nothing. Li Baidian whistled and let out a strange laugh. It was a meaningful one. "Laugh your ass," Li Tianlan scolded with a smile. He felt uncomfortable under Wang Yuetong's gaze and went upstairs with Qin Weibai. "Your friends are quite interesting." Qin Weibai took Li Tianlan's arm and walked up the stairs. She chuckled and said, "Ning Qianqing and Li Taishu, these two people can at least reach the peak of the thunder-shocking realm in the future. They are the real right-hand men. Who knows what will happen in the future?" Li Tianlan smiled and suddenly asked, "Why did you go to Mount Tong tonight?" "I got the news and rushed there. I happened to meet Zhuang Huayang on the way, so we went up the mountain together." Li Tianlan didn't ask how she got the news. He just reached out and touched her head. Qin Weibai seemed a little dissatisfied. She held Li Tianlan's hand and said, "What? Do you think I'm a child? I'm older than you. You have to call me sister, okay?" They had done the most intimate thing. In front of Qin Weibai, Li Tianlan really had nothing to hide. He kissed Qin Weibai's face hard and said with a low smile, "Why didn't you let me call you sister when you called me husband last night?" "Bro, don't say it." Qin Weibai's face was rosy, and her beauty was dazzling. She pushed Li Tianlan to the chair next to her. Li Tianlan put his arms around her and pulled her into his arms. "Stop fooling around." Qin Weibai giggled and stood up. She blushed and said softly, "I made you supper. Are you hungry? Would you like to join us?" Li Tianlan said. There was a small dining table in front of him. It was not big, but it was exquisite and delicate. It was probably the place where Qin Weibai usually had her supper because one of the chairs was obviously just moved here. Li Tianlan patted the table and said, "Where are Baidian and the others?" "There's food downstairs. They won't get hungry." After saying that, Qin Weibai went downstairs directly. After a while she came up with a tray. The items on the tray were also very simple. There were 2 bowls of porridge and a few plates of pickled vegetables. They looked refreshing and delicious. Qin Weibai sat down opposite Li Tianlan and said with a smile, "Eat something light tonight or it's not good for your stomach." Li Tianlan nodded and took a sip of the porridge. He felt that it was especially delicious. Delicious. Li Tianlan smiled and said softly, "What's inside?" "Shiitake mushrooms, lean meat and vegetables. I cooked it for a few hours. Eat more if you like it. There's more downstairs." Qin Weibai stared at Li Tianlan's face and said. Li Tianlan nodded and looked at the porridge in front of him, lost in thought. I didn't like porridge very much before. He was silent for a full 5 minutes before he suddenly opened his mouth and said in a self-mocking tone, there are very few people who like to eat porridge in a place like ours. There was no electricity in our campsite, so we had to burn a fire to cook. There was a lot of food, but most of it was piled up all year round. It was hot there, so the rice would sometimes go moldy and turn yellow or even black. There was a river near the campsite. The water was drinkable, but it was not clean and a little muddy. The porridge cooked with that kind of water and that kind of rice really didn't taste good. But it could keep people from getting hungry, so I had to make do with it. I'm not afraid that you'll laugh at me. When I was a child, I was about 4 or 5 years old. I cried every time I ate. If I didn't eat, I would get hungry. If I was hungry, I would cry. If I ate bad food, I would still cry. I started to practice martial arts when I was 5 years old. When I was 8, the rice in the campsite was very moldy. The rice was black and the porridge was black and smelled fishy. It tasted worse than medicine. I trained hard at that time and ate 5 or 6 meals a day. Basically, it was that kind of black porridge. I vomited after eating it and then I ate it again. I ate it for about a month. Since then, I've been traumatized. Every time I eat porridge, I feel uncomfortable. Later, I couldn't stand it anymore, so I went hunting. When there were more people in the campsite, there were more animals. When there were fewer people in the campsite and there were no animals nearby, I could even catch a snake as a big meal. I often got nothing from hunting. When I was hungry, I even gnawed on tree barks and grass roots. I really didn't want to eat those moldy things. At that time, I thought that if I could really get out one day, I would absolutely not eat porridge or steamed bread. I would eat meat for every meal and nothing else. When I came to Huading, the first meal I had was with you and Senior You. It was the most comfortable meal I've ever had. Later, I ate the porridge you cooked. It smelled so good, so damn good. I fell in love with it the first time I had it. Even now, every time I eat, I'm very surprised. So now I can't even adapt to eating, let alone adapt to Zhongzhou state. Every time I look at these food, it's like a dream. Li Tianlan's voice gradually became lower. Finally, he looked at the bowl of porridge in front of him and murmured, how many years has it been since Grandpa and those veterans tasted such a bowl of porridge? Qin Weibai reached out and grabbed Li Tianlan's hand. Her eyes became softer and softer. She said softly, do you miss them? Yes, even in my dreams. I can't wait to bring them to Huading now. I want them to see the prosperity now, and I want Grandpa to see you, his granddaughter-in-law. Li Tianlan smiled. Qin Weibai blinked and deliberately diverted Li Tianlan's attention. She said with a smile, granddaughter-in-law? I'm not the granddaughter-in-law in your grandpa's heart. In any case, I won't let him be satisfied. Li Tianlan was stunned. His originally gloomy mood also became confused. What do you mean? Qin Weibai deliberately guided Li Tianlan's mood. She sat opposite him and said with a smile, do you know why I don't let you go back to the Sky Academy with Zhuang Huayang? I just want to give some people a chance. Since you entered the school, you've performed so well. Some people have been waiting for so many years. I guess they can't sit still anymore. Li Tianlan was still at a loss. Full. Qin Weibai gently glared at Li Tianlan and said in a soft tone, didn't your grandpa tell you? You have an engagement. Have you forgotten? The person you will marry in the future is her. When she said this, Qin Weibai's expression was calm and gentle, but her eyes were a little complicated. Li Tianlan's heart trembled slightly. He subconsciously shook his head and said in a firm tone, I only want you. Marry me? Qin Weibai blinked her eyes and smiled sweetly. Marry you? Li Tianlan said resolutely and without any hesitation, the engagement can't stop me. Grandpa can't stop me. No one can. Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan in a daze and did not speak for a long time. Li Tianlan's face seemed to be a little hot, but he hesitated and said, in my heart, only you are the most perfect. Platter. Qin Weibai suddenly reached out and directly swept all the things on the table in front of her under the table. The porridge and pickles fell on the ground in a mess. She stood up and put her hands on the table. She lifted her long and straight legs one by one. Under Li Tianlan's somewhat dull gaze, she climbed directly onto the table and climbed toward him. Li Tianlan swallowed hard. Qin Weibai's face was red. She was obviously a little shy to do this kind of thing for the first time, but she did not have the slightest intention to stop. She climbed over the table and sat directly in Li Tianlan's arms, her eyes like silk. At this moment, Qin Weibai could be said to be extremely charming, wild, and sexy. Li Tianlan breathed quickly and held Qin Weibai's body tightly. The hot blood rushed and washed away his reason, making him almost completely crazy. Chapter 64. Stepping into the corridor on the second floor, Li Baidian began to sigh as soon as he entered the room. His long and short sighs looked really miserable. Ning Qianqing was seriously injured, but if he didn't fight he could move slowly. He followed Li Baidian in, frowned slightly and said, "What the hell are you screaming for?" CKU. This is called melancholy. Melancholy, do you understand? Li Baidian rolled his eyes. Looking at the large and soft bed in the room, he sighed again and shook his head. Look at Tianlan hugging the first beauty of Huading to sleep tonight, and then look at us? We're F*King sharing the same bed. Gay love is everywhere. The gap between us is too big. Ning Qianqing's mouth twitched. He didn't think much at first, but after hearing Li Baidian's words, he suddenly felt that the big bed in front of him was an eyesore. He shook his head and sat on the bed. He glanced at Li Baidian and said with a smile, "What? Envy, jealousy, and hatred?" "Of course I am." Li Baidian sighed and said, "Didn't you see it on the mountain? She really shot me. If there is a woman like her who protects me at all costs, I'll be satisfied. But I'm not jealous. I haven't seen Qin Weibai before, but I've heard of her. I've heard a lot about her. Today I know it's not an exaggeration. Beautiful, too beautiful. That's not good." Ning Qianqing casually lay on the bed to rest. He was sober, but he felt dizzy and his body was a little weak. He pulled the quilt over and said with a smile, "Isn't it good to be beautiful? Are you looking for a girlfriend or a wife who is ugly?" "Of course it's good to be beautiful, but it's not good to be too beautiful. Qin Weibai is a disaster. Think about it, with such a beautiful wife, after Tianlan has tasted her, will he still be interested in other women? A bunch of mediocre women, I guess he won't be interested in them. Sad, too damn sad." Ning Qianqing was silent. He wanted to say that what Li Baidian said was wrong, but after thinking about it carefully, he found that it did make sense. With Qin Weibai, other women were really mediocre. To have only one woman in a lifetime was a normal thing for many people, but in the eyes of some people, it was a bit scary. "Wang Yuatong. Can't you eat it?" Ning Qianqing thought for a moment and suddenly said. When they went upstairs just now, everyone could feel the irritation and even jealousy of the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai. When she entered her room and closed the door, the whole floor shook. It was terrifying. Although Ning Qianqing felt a little baffled, he was sure that the little princess was interested in Li Tianlan. The key was to see what Li Tianlan thought. In terms of charm, Qin Weibai might be unparalleled in the world, but even in front of Qin Weibai, Wang Yuatong was a real delicacy that could be devoured. "Wang Yuatong? Isn't this too scary? It's not a question of whether I can do it or not. It's a question of whether I dare to do it. If I really do it, the Wang family of Beihai will tear Tianlan apart." Li Baidian was speechless. "This is too crazy." "Crazy your sister." Ning Qianqing kicked him. "Stop gossiping and go to sleep." Li Baidian grunted but did not take off his clothes. He directly lay down on the bed. Ning Qianqing closed his eyes and planned to meditate. After tonight's battle, the fire-flaming realm was close at hand. If he could enter the state of meditation, he could successfully break through in half an hour at most. However, after trying for a long time, he still could not calm down. Ning Qianqing was not in a hurry. He closed his eyes and rested. Just as his consciousness was about to fade, Li Baidian suddenly stood up and said, "I'm really not used to sleeping in the same bed with a man. You sleep, I'll go downstairs for a walk." He laughed and said, "Didn't Qin Weibai ask the driver's sister to wait downstairs? I'll go talk to her about my life ideals." Ning Qianqing, who was about to fall asleep, sneered and said, "Didn't you hear what Qin Weibai called her? That's horsewoman, one of the 12 super masters of samsara. If you want to die, go ahead." "Do you think I'm scared?" Li Baidian chuckled and walked out. Woo! An ear-piercing siren suddenly sounded, cutting through the deep night outside the window. Li Baidian, who had not left the room, and Ning Qianqing, who was on the bed, were stunned at the same time. Before the two could speak, the shrill and piercing siren suddenly sounded. For a moment, it seemed that the siren was echoing in every corner of the entire Yonghua villa. Li Baidian and Ning Qianqing rushed to the window one after another and looked out. Outside the window, the police lights were flashing. Teams of policemen gathered in front of the villa and then quickly dispersed. In the blink of an eye, the entire villa was surrounded. Countless policemen with shields were at the forefront. At first glance, the front of the villa seemed to have become a sea of shields and helmets. "How many people are there?" Li Baidian subconsciously muttered to himself. Ning Qianqing did not speak. His gaze passed over the policemen in front of the villa and fell directly on the 7 or 8 military trucks behind the large group of policemen. The 7 or 8 military trucks stopped behind the large group of policemen. The doors opened and teams of heavily armed soldiers jumped out of the trucks. Under the leadership of an aging middle-aged man, they went straight to the front door of the villa. Tan Qinghua. Ning Qianqing's pupils contracted slightly. His chest rose and fell as he breathed deeply. The policemen tacitly made way for the soldiers to pass. A middle-aged man with the title of Deputy Chief Police quickly walked to Tan Qinghua and saluted. Ning Qianqing, who saw this scene, narrowed his eyes and did not speak. "I'll go down and have a look." Li Beidian suddenly spoke with a serious expression. Ning Qianqing subconsciously looked at his watch and then said, "Let's go down together. What will come can't be avoided." The two looked at each other and walked out of the door together. They had thought that after leaving Mount Tong, both the Zhong family and the Tan family would calm down. At least there would be no trouble tonight. But they did not expect that they would act so quickly. What was going on outside? The police, armed police, special police, and the army appeared together, which also meant that the Zhong family and the Tan family had officially joined hands. In terms of time, the two sides had even reached an agreement at the first moment. Otherwise it would not have been so fast. Outside the villa, the siren had quieted down. Tan Qinghua, who had come to avenge his son in a military uniform, shook hands with the deputy chief police in front of him and said in a hoarse voice, "Director He, are you sure this is the place?" "Yes, the murderers who injured Zhong Xiaofeng and killed Tan Xilai are all here. Should we arrange someone to call them?" The deputy chief police let go of Tan Qinghua's hand. His tone was neither humble nor arrogant, but his eyes were extremely cold. "Don't bother. Just arrest them." Tan Xilai's expression was dull, but he was still polite to the deputy chief police in front of him. He said gently, "Director He, thank you for your hard work. We need your people to cooperate with us later." Yiping. He was one of the 11 standing committees of Huading, the director of the Ministry of Politics and Law and the director of the Huading Police Station, a capable general of the Prince Group, and one of Zhong Yongming's right-hand men in Huading. He was the boss of Huading's political and legal system, and Tan Qinghua, the deputy commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations. The two core figures of the Prince Group were working together. Such a scale was enough to show how determined the Zhong family and the Tan family were at this time. They obviously did not intend to care about the reputation of the Samsara Palace. "My people will act with the comrades in the Eastern Theater of Operations. Secretary Zhong has instructed me to cooperate fully." He Ping nodded and said calmly. In fact, this senior official at the level of deputy governor was also very annoyed. He Qingting, the deputy director of the Huading police station, was a mad dog raised by the Zhong family and also a confidant of He Ping. But in Mount Tong she was forced to kneel by Qin Weibai. A dignified deputy director of the bureau knelt down. Not to mention the policeman present at that time, even he, the director of the Ministry of Politics and Law, felt ashamed. No matter how strong the Samsara Palace is, it is outside the country. This is Zhongzhou State. When you are respected, you are the distinguished guests of Zhongzhou State. When you are not respected, you are nothing. No matter how strong the palace master of the Samsara Palace is, she has not dared to enter Zhongzhou State for many years. Now there are 4 invincible realm experts in Zhongzhou State. How can the palace master of the Samsara Palace defeat them? A mere spokesperson of the palace master dared to force a senior official of Zhongzhou State to kneel. Where did Qin Weibai get such confidence? After He Qingting, who had lost all face, went back, He Ping directly scolded her. Then, after communicating with Zhong Yongming, he directly led a team to Yonghua Villa to arrest her. "I don't care whether you are Samsara or not. If I don't teach you a lesson, you will really think that this is outside the country. Commander Tan, rest assured. My people will cooperate fully with you." He Ping took a step back and said flatly. This was also Zhong Yongming's instruction. Seriously speaking, allies and his own people were naturally different, but there were also differences between his own people and himself. He Ping intended to teach a lesson to the Samsara Palace, which had no foundation in Zhongzhou State. But since Tan Qinghua was willing to test the waters first, He Ping naturally would not stand out. Tan Qinghua coughed, nodded slightly and led his people forward. Behind him, 300 elites of the Eastern Theater of Operations followed suit and approached the door of the villa. The villa was quiet and there was no response at all. Tan Qinghua slightly narrowed his eyes, opened the front door and walked into the detached courtyard. Looking at the still quiet villa, he suddenly sneered and said without hesitation, "Raging Fire, take Team 1 and Team 2 and go directly in to arrest them. Team 3 is responsible for guarding. Whoever dares to resist or escape, kill on the spot." His voice was cold and gloomy, clearly echoing in the small courtyard and into the villa. "Yes." Raging Fire, the guard with a scar on his face who had been following him, subconsciously straightened his body. Behind him, 300 elites of the Eastern Theater of Operations pulled the bolts at the same time, and the crisp sound of metal hitting each other was uniform. The 300 elites were expressionless and they were ready for battle. Raging Fire looked back at them, slightly narrowed his eyes and waved his hand. "Team 1 and Team 2 follow me in." 200 people stepped out at the same time, followed Raging Fire, and directly rushed to the door of the villa in a fighting posture. The dense and rapid footsteps were not messy at all. The scene of 200 elites moving forward in silence had an indescribable aggressiveness and impact. In Europe, trespassing on private property is a very dangerous thing. "Are you sure you want to do this?" A sexy voice with an exotic charm rang out. It was neither fast nor slow, sounding elegant and gentle, but an extremely dangerous aura instantly filled the entire courtyard. Raging Fire, who was about to enter the villa, suddenly stopped in his tracks. Less than 5 centimeters away from his feet, a weak electric light shone. It looked gentle, but it spread wildly in the blink of an eye. There was a faint sound of thunder rolling across the sky. In an instant, the glaring electric light spread unscrupulously in the air, getting brighter and brighter, increasing in number and finally connecting into a large area. The entire villa was almost surrounded by the electric light. Countless bright lines intertwined and flickered densely. The air was extremely distorted, and after the electric light, the villa became blurry. Raging Fire stopped in his tracks. Facing the electric light that could easily turn him into a pile of charcoal, his expression was still calm. The 300 elites of the Eastern Theater of Operations were also expressionless. "This is Jianghu State." Tan Qinghua's face was livid under the large area of electric light. The corner of his mouth twitched and he said gloomily, "Who are you?" "Horsewoman of Samsara." A tall and sexy figure of a woman appeared at the gate of the villa. Through the electric light, her blonde hair danced wildly, and she looked dignified and holy. "Can you stop me?" Tan Shilai's tone was sarcastic. Of course he had heard of Horsewoman. Even among the 12 super masters of Samsara, Horsewoman ranked relatively high. She was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and her strength even surpassed the peak. It was indeed terrifying, but so what? This was Jianghu State. Even experts of the invincible realm outside the country did not dare to kill in Jianghu State. Tian Ling, who was shot to death by human emperor 15 years ago, was a living example. Tan Qinghua's eyes were cold. His son's murderer was in the villa. His patience was wearing thin, and he was getting more and more agitated. "I want to try." In front of the villa, Horsewoman smiled gently, but the electric light in front of her fluctuated violently. "Then try as long as you can bear the consequences." Tan Qinghua sneered and suddenly raised his voice and roared, "Experts outside the country attack us in Jianghu State. They are invaders. Boys of the Eastern Theater of Operations, what should we do to invaders?" "Kill." After a short silence, hundreds of elites of the Eastern Theater of Operations roared at the top of their lungs. "Kill." Chapter 65. This was the only thought in Tan Qinghua's mind. The cooperation between Samsara Palace and Jianghu State in recent years was indeed pleasant, and they had established a relatively good friendship. However, there were too many variables in the friendship between a big country and a big force. Not to mention anything else, Jianghu State had never welcomed Samsara Palace to enter its territory to develop its own force, which was enough to show the subtle relationship between the two. As the spokesperson of the master of Samsara Palace, Qin Weibai was in Huading, so Jianghu State could turn a blind eye. After all, when Jianghu State needed Samsara to contribute to something, it was the most convenient thing to contact Qin Weibai. Since Horsewoman, Flaming Fire, and the other super masters of Samsara were in Huading, Jianghu State could also turn a blind eye. But if the super masters of Samsara attacked the soldiers of Jianghu State, it would be a taboo. If foreign experts attacked the army of Jianghu State, they were enemies and invaders. If Horsewoman really dared to attack the soldiers of the Eastern Theater of Operations, then the entire Jianghu State would become her enemy. None of the 6 could protect her, nor would they dare to. Protecting her was tantamount to treason. At that time, not only her but also Flaming Fire, and even Qin Weibai would be uprooted. There was no second possibility. Tan Qinghua was well aware of the consequences, and he believed that Horsewoman also knew. Therefore, although the lightning in front of him was gorgeous, in his eyes, Horsewoman was completely bluffing. Tan Qinghua's eyes were cold. He was not in the mood to play any psychological tactics with Horsewoman. Whether Horsewoman was pretending or really crazy, he did not intend to compromise. Ning Qianqing must die. Who dares to move? A deep and old voice suddenly sounded at the door. In everyone's sight, Zhuang Huayang, the headmaster of the Sky Academy, also in a military uniform with the rank of general, appeared in front of the door. Li Beidian and Ning Qianqing stood on both sides of him. Tan Qinghua, who had been calm, suddenly became ferocious the moment he saw Ning Qianqing. He stared at Ning Qianqing. In his eyes, besides coldness, there was only a kind of naked hatred and brutality. Headmaster Zhuang, what do you mean? Tan Qinghua's tone was cold. His eyes seemed to be completely fixed on Ning Qianqing and refused to move away. Zhuang Huayang casually glanced at Horsewoman. The knight hesitated for a moment before waving his hand. There was a slight fluctuation in the air, and the lightning that had shrouded the entire villa instantly disappeared. I'd like to ask what Commander Tan means. The life-and-death duel between Tan Shilai and Ning Qianqing is a normal internal competition of our Sky Academy. Commander's reaction is so extreme. Are you trying to trample on the rules of our academy? Zhuang Huayang took a step to the side, intentionally or unintentionally, and stood in front of Ning Qianqing, staring at Tan Qinghua as he asked. He killed my son. Tan Qinghua said in an old-fashioned tone, I have to bring him back. As he spoke, Lai Hua and the 300 elites from the eastern battle zone took a step forward at the same time. The sound of their footsteps landing on the ground rang clearly in the courtyard, dull and clear. This is an internal matter of our Sky Academy. Since the commander chose to send Tan Shilai to the Sky Academy, you should have made such preparations. I'm sorry you can't take Qianqing away. After the internal study of the Sky Academy, you will be given an explanation. Zhuang Huayang said coldly. At this moment, the old headmaster, who always seemed to smile at everyone and seemed to have no temper at all, was expressionless. His words were filled with an indescribable strength and determination. I can't take him away? The corners of Tan Qinghua's mouth rose. A grim smile gradually spread on his face and became more and more obvious. He suddenly pulled his collar and roared, I don't want an explanation from your Sky Academy today. I must take Ning Qianqing away. You can't stop me, no one can stop me. He Ping, the director of the political and legal department of Huading, who had been following behind Tan Qinghua, frowned slightly. Tan Qinghua could do anything in the face of Horsewoman, but it was a bit difficult to deal with Zhuang Huayang, who was also a general of the military. He couldn't treat Zhuang Huayang as a foreign expert, could he? Seeing that things were going to be awkward, He Ping coughed and suddenly said with a smile, Headmaster, I'm here to take away a young man named Li Tianlan. He injured Secretary Zhong's son, Zhong Xiaofeng. The Municipal Public Security Bureau wants to take him back to the Bureau for investigation. Headmaster, this is not an internal matter of the Sky Academy, is it? Bullshit. Zhuang Huayang sneered. Looking at He Ping's suddenly embarrassed face, he said mercilessly, Li Tianlan is also a freshman of the Sky Academy. If this is not our internal matter, then what is it? We deal with our own students. This is the rule. If you want to break the rule, you can try. I've been in the special warfare system for so many years. Although I didn't do well as the headmaster of the Sky Academy, I still have to uphold the rules of the academy. I'll make it clear today. You Tan Qinghua can't take Ning Qianqing away. You He Ping can't take Li Tianlan away either. Zhuang Huayang. Tan Qinghua's face suddenly turned red. His emotions were almost completely out of control. He roared angrily, I'm going to take the murderer away today. Let's see what you can do. Domineering. No wonder you're the deputy commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations. You're really domineering. Before Zhuang Huayang could respond, a casual male voice rang from behind Tan Qinghua. With a strong smile, the voice did not care about Tan Qinghua's current feelings at all. When I was a child, my brother told me that the strongest fist is the last word. Old Tan, old Zhuang, what's the use of you two dawdling for a long time? Just fight. Old Zhuang is not weak. Old Tan, you have hundreds of elites under your command. So many policemen are not to be trifled with. Anyway, you're in a hurry to take revenge. Fight first and talk later. You don't need to think about the consequences, do you? Tan Qinghua frowned and looked back with a sullen face. In his sight, a young man in beige casual clothes walked over lazily with his hands in his pockets. ignoring all the policemen present. The young man was tall and handsome. When he smiled, he seemed to be full of a modest and gentle temperament. He was harmless and made people feel very comfortable. Zhuang Huayang glanced at him and raised his eyebrows slightly. He was calm and collected. Tan Qinghua's body tensed up and he said attentively, "What are you doing here?" "Wang Xiaoyao. King Xiaoyao of the Wang family of Beihai." For anyone, this was a figure that needed to be taken seriously. Even if he did not have any official position, the core high level of the Wang family of Beihai was enough to be on an equal footing with most people. "I'm here to watch the fun." Wang Xiaoyao walked over with a smile, patted Tan Qinghua on the shoulder and said with a smile, "I heard that your son is dead? Congratulations." Wang Xiaoyao. Tan Qinghua slapped Wang Xiaoyao's palm away and flew into a rage. Oh, a slip of the tongue. Don't mind me. Old Tan, you have a bad temper and can't take a joke. I know you're angry, but don't take it out on me. I came here in a hurry. I won't stop you from taking revenge. I just have something to discuss with you." Wang Xiaoyao replied a few times, still looking careless and tired. But because of his arrival, the atmosphere at the scene became more and more subtle. "Say it." Tan Qinghua looked at Wang Xiaoyao coldly and squeezed a word out of his teeth. "Well, it's just a small matter." Wang Xiaoyao lit a cigarette, and the smoke unscrupulously sprayed onto Tan Qinghua's face. He narrowed his eyes and pointed to the villa in front of him with a smile. "I won't stop you from taking revenge, but there are two people in this villa that I care about the most. My niece Yuatong and Qin Weibai. I won't stop you from killing anyone tonight, but if anything happens to these two people, I'll kill your whole family. Old Tan, do you believe me?" Creak! Tan Qinghua clenched his teeth so hard that they almost broke. "Don't gnash your teeth." Wang Xiaoyao flicked the cigarette ash and said lightly, "You should know me. This is not a threat. I mean what I say." He glanced around and was a little confused. He did not see Li Tianlan, who made him extremely uncomfortable, nor did he see Qin Weibai. Wang Xiaoyao felt strange. He looked at Horsewoman and said with a smile, "Horsewoman, where's your boss?" "Tut, it's so lively. Wang Xiaoyao is here too. Old Tan looks a little excited. I really don't know what will happen tonight. If there is a conflict, I'm afraid the situation in Huading will completely explode." On the rooftop of a tall building less than 200 meters away from Yonghua Villa, under the deep night, Gu Changjiang, the director of Huading Special Operations Bureau, watched what was happening in front of Yonghua Villa through binoculars. He suddenly said, "Yulan, what do you think is the probability of Old Tan taking action?" Beside Gu Changjiang, the petite and hot Gu Yulan hesitated and said softly, "Tan Qinghua is emotionally unstable now. It's possible for him to do anything." "It's possible for him to do anything." Gu Changjiang held the binoculars and said to himself again, "It's possible for him to do anything." He sighed softly for the friendship between him and Tan Qinghua, and also for their different positions. "Let's not talk about this." Gu Changjiang put down the binoculars and said gently, "Yulan, what do you think of what happened tonight?" Gu Yulan was the last disciple of Gu Qianchuan, the first elder of Kunlun City. She was an absolutely important figure among the young generation of Kunlun City. Gu Changjiang must pay attention to her opinion. Li Tianlan must die. Gu Yulan was silent for a while. She thought of Li Tianlan's decisiveness and ruthlessness when he disabled Zhong Xiaofeng, his madness when he took the initiative to provoke, and his calmness and indifference. She felt a chill in her heart for no reason. Li Tianlan was too calm. He was so calm that he didn't look like a human. At this moment, all she could think of was the scene when Li Tianlan slowly crushed Zhong Xiaofeng's foot. At that time, Li Tianlan laughed coldly and cruelly, but his eyes were as calm as a glacier. He was so calm that no murderous intent could be seen, as if he was casually stepping on an ant. He was definitely a madman who disregarded life to the extreme. If this madman with infinite potential didn't die, Kunlun City would never have a comfortable life in the future. Li Tianlan. Gu Changjiang narrowed his eyes slightly, picked up the binoculars again and said with a smile, "I didn't see him. Where is he now?" What Gu Changjiang didn't expect, what Wang Xiaoyao didn't expect, and even what everyone else didn't expect was that when the conflict outside the villa was on the verge of breaking out, Li Tianlan was on the big bed in the master bedroom of the villa, pressing Qin Weibai's back and fooling around. There was no black silk skirt, but the sexy lingerie could also make people have a nosebleed. Qin Weibai was sometimes cold, sometimes charming, sometimes dignified and sometimes flirtatious. Even a saint couldn't bear it, let alone Li Tianlan. The atmosphere outside the villa was tense. Li Tianlan also wanted to go out, but he really couldn't control himself. Looking at Qin Weibai, who buried her pretty face in the quilt and let him do whatever he wanted, he held her soft and delicate waist. Li Tianlan really felt that he was willing to die. The bedroom was full of spring scenery. Outside the villa was murderous. At the critical moment of avenging his son, Tan Qinghua really didn't want to provoke Wang Xiaoyao, who spoke in a gentle voice as if he loved him when he said he would kill his whole family. Tan Qinghua vented all his evil anger on Zhuang Huayang, a general headmaster in the special warfare system, a deputy commander of a theater of operations in the military system. Tan Qinghua naturally wouldn't take Zhuang Huayang, who was about to retire, seriously. His patience had completely disappeared. Seeing that Zhuang Huayang was still in an unfathomable state, his expression became colder and colder. Get out of the way. I said you can't take anyone away today. Not to mention these 300 people, even if there were 10 times more people, you still can't. Zhuang Huayang looked at Tan Qinghua with no expression. The electric light lingered between his fingers and gradually spread to his whole arm. At this moment, Zhuang Huayang was still elegant, but as the electric light spread and expanded on his arm, his whole person gained a trace of a strong and cold aura and style. You're forcing me. You're forcing me. You're forcing me. Tan Qinghua's tone became louder and louder. He suddenly roared, "Get out of the way." Zhuang Huayang said nothing and just sneered. Tan Qinghua took a deep look at the motionless Zhuang Huayang, nodded and said, "Very good." Under Zhuang Huayang's suddenly focused eyes, Tan Qinghua spoke again, "Raging Fire." Here. Raging Fire, who was blocking the entrance of the villa with 300 elites, responded loudly. Tan Qinghua glanced at Zhuang Huayang and said calmly, "Kill Ning Qianqing. Whoever dares to stop you, kill them too." Raging Fire looked at Zhuang Huayang in front of him. A red light flashed in his eyes and even the scar on his face became ferocious. He raised the submachine gun in his hand and aimed directly at Zhuang Huayang. Behind him, the 300 special warfare elites of the Eastern Theater of Operations were expressionless as they raised their guns at the same time. The corner of Raging Fire's mouth twitched and he directly roared, "Kill! Who dares?" A magnetic voice reverberated in the night sky, drifting and clear as if it came from the horizon. Everyone looked up at the same time. The whizzing sound of the helicopter's rotors came from afar. The drifting voice came from above and covered the entire villa area in an instant. "Tan Qinghua, how dare you touch the people of my border control corps? Do you really think that I can't crush a fake wealthy family like the Tan family? Or do you think that the 550,000 professional soldiers of the Border Control Corps don't dare to kill your so-called own people?" A helicopter flew in from hundreds of meters away. In the night, above the firmament, thunder suddenly roared and resounded through the sky. For a moment, the whizzing sound of the helicopter seemed to have disappeared. Everyone's ears were filled with a roar and only thunder could be heard. The sky above the entire villa area began to glow. Lightning flashed in the sky, revealing a kind of elegant and dangerous blue in the pale sky. A majestic sword intent as vast as the sea came crashing down from above like the power of heaven. In a trance, there was a kind of indomitable heroic spirit. There was a desolate killing intent between heaven and earth. The sword intent reached the ground from hundreds of meters high in the sky, and the entire villa area shook violently. In front of Zhuang Huayang, Raging Fire was walking at the forefront. The 300 Eastern Theater of Operations elites behind him were completely like powerless ants under this sword intent. The sword intent spread and hundreds of people were all sent flying. They fell from side to side and were instantly seriously injured. Jade Lake Sword Scripture. 9 Heavens Wind and Thunder Sword. The helicopter flew overhead. A figure, accompanied by the lightning that filled the sky, fell along with the thunderclaps. His figure landed directly in front of Tan Qinghua, who had an extremely ugly expression on his face. He reached out and grabbed Tan Qinghua's neck, lifting him up. Chapter 66. 15 years ago, Night Spirit, a super force in the Dark World, went east to Jianghu State. 2 superiors of the Invincible Realm led 3,000 elites to invade the border of Jianghu State. After the battle, Tianling, the superior of the Invincible Realm organized by Night Spirit, died under the attack of the Human Emperor, and another superior of the Invincible Realm, Tian Xin, fled with serious injuries. 3,000 Night Spirit elites and nearly 10,000 foreign mercenaries were annihilated by the Border Praetorian Corps, with not a single survivor. 12 years ago, a terrorist organization with the code name Turk in the northern border could be said to have a strong and powerful army. Their troops were mobilized at the border, and 2,000 elites from the border Praetorian army launched a surprise attack on the headquarters of the Turk organization. After 36 hours of fierce battle, the 50,000 soldiers of the Turk organization were wiped out, and the 20,000 captives were all killed. 9 years ago, there was a border conflict between Jianghu state and Heng state. In less than 12 hours, 20,000 elites of the border Praetorian Corps set foot in Heng state and marched 800 miles in 72 hours. Guns and cannons roared and blood flowed like a river. 5 years ago, Bloody Blade, a super mercenary group in the Dark World, accepted a mysterious commission. Before they sent their troops to Jianghu state, 3,000 elites of the border Praetorian Corps had secretly sneaked into their base. 30,000 mercenaries, whether they resisted or surrendered, were all slaughtered. In the past 2 decades, the country had been enjoying peace and prosperity, but the border Praetorian Corps of Jianghu state had been fighting constantly. The super forces of the Dark World, mercenary groups, killer groups, terrorist organizations, and even some mysterious armed forces of unknown origin. The Border Control Corps never lacked opponents. They were the most elite super-large combat corps of Jianghu state and also the most cold-blooded corps. Because their commander had said something when he took office 20 years ago. This sentence was still widely spread in the Dark World and had even derived countless versions. It could be called a famous saying in the Dark World. None of my enemies survived. That's what he said and that's what he did. In the past 20 years, the Border Praetorian Guard Corps had fought countless battles, and their army commander had always taken the lead in every battle. Resist? Kill. Surrender? Kill. Wherever the Border Control Corps passed, there were only dead people besides their own people. Over the years, the number of enemies who had died in the hands of the Border Control Corps had long been uncountable. Countless blood and corpses had watered the prestige of the 550,000 troops of the Border Control Corps. At the same time, it had also created a code name that, although not in the Invincible Realm, was more famous than many Invincible Realm experts. One of the 4 gods of Jianghu state, Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Jianghu state. He was a member of the decision-making committee of Jianghu state and one of the only 3 marshals in the military. No one could have imagined that Dongqing Wudi would appear here. Tan Qinghua didn't expect it, Zhuang Huayang didn't expect it, and even Ning Qianqing didn't expect it. Dongqing Wudi's domineering appearance made it clear that he did not intend to save the Zhong family and the Tan family any face. The dignified general of the Jianghu state military and the deputy commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations was now held in the air by the neck. This was probably the most shocking scene that most people had ever seen in their lives. The corners of Zhuang Huayang's mouth twitched slightly. It was said that Dongqing Wudi was arrogant, bloodthirsty, and extremely protective. Now it seemed that the rumors were true and even a little conservative. Marshal? Ning Qianqing finally reacted and rushed to Dongqing Wudi's side. His eyes were feverish and his whole body was trembling with excitement. Dongqing Wudi glanced at Ning Qianqing and nodded with a smile. This was an old man who was filled with an indescribable aura from head to toe. He was dressed in a military uniform and was about 50 years old. His temples were grizzled and his appearance was not outstanding. However, his eyes were indescribably wild and fierce, like an eagle soaring in the sky, ready to pounce at any time. Every move he made seemed to have a kind of courageous and murderous aura, which was a kind of soul-stirring deterrent. You killed his son? Dongqing Wudi looked at Ning Qianqing and said with a smile. His voice was deep and magnetic, and it seemed that every word he said had a charm that made people listen carefully. Tan Shilai took the initiative to propose a life-and-death duel. He lost and I won. Ning Qianqing subconsciously straightened his body and replied calmly. Well done. Dongqing Wudi said casually, but his grip on Tan Qinghua's neck tightened. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the military general whose rank was only 1 level lower than his, and said lightly, What do you have to say? Tan Qinghua's face had turned purple-red. His feet were subconsciously struggling in the air, but his eyes were burning with extreme anger when he looked at Dongqing Wudi. Marshal, what do you mean? Tan Qinghua's breathing became more and more difficult. He held Dongqing Wudi's palm with both hands and barely squeezed a few words out of his throat. Before Dongqing Wudi could speak, a furious roar suddenly rang out, Let go of the commander. Raging Fire, who had just been sent flying by a stream of sword energy, had just gotten up. When he saw the scene in front of him, he was so frightened that he rushed up with a shout without even thinking about it. Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre. Who was he? His bloodthirsty character was well known in the whole dark world. He was famous for being cold-blooded and cruel both internally and externally. In the past 2 decades, there had been many senior officials who had impeached Dongqing Wudi. But this marshal with outstanding military exploits had always been in his current position, hadn't he? It would not be surprising if such a ruthless man killed Tan Qinghua, the deputy commander. No one would doubt Dongqing Wudi's courage. With nearly 600,000 elite troops in his hands, what couldn't he do? What couldn't he do? Bang! Dongqing Wudi's expression was cold. He kicked raging fire in the chest with his heavy military boots. The expert at the peak of the fire-flaming realm was kicked away before he landed on the ground. In the air, a large amount of blood burst out from all over his body. His body slammed into a parasol tree in the courtyard of the villa. The trunk trembled violently. Raging Fire's body twitched a few times and then fell silent. You offended your superior. Damn it. Dongqing Wudi said blandly. At this moment, not only the policeman, but also He Ping's body trembled slightly. With his current status, he didn't have to be like this at all. He Ping might be respectful and humble in front of the 4 gods of Jianghu state, the 3 marshals of the army headquarters, and even any member of the decision-making committee, but he would not be afraid. But Dongqing Wudi was an exception. In Jianghu state he was not the strongest or the most powerful, but he was definitely the most bloodthirsty. What would be the consequence of angering Dongqing Wudi when there was no combat capability to check and balance him? The deputy commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations was in his hands. What was he, the director of the Ministry of Politics and Law, to him? Dongqing Wudi's eyes swept over and fell on He Ping. He said calmly, "Go back and tell Zhong Yongming that I'll take care of Tianlan. If he's not convinced, he can come to me. Although the Border Control Corps is at the border, if he really dares to fight, I don't mind playing with him in Huading." He Ping hesitated for a moment and raised his head subconsciously. In his sight, Dongqing Wudi's expression was calm and indifferent, but there seemed to be endless evil light flickering slightly in his eyes. He hurriedly lowered his head and even slightly bent his waist. Yes. The corner of Dongqing Wudi's mouth twitched. He directly waved his hand and said crisply, "Get out." Without saying a word, He Ping directly turned around and walked out of the small courtyard. A large number of policemen outside the courtyard began to retreat at his order, and the sound of footsteps was chaotic. In Dongqing Wudi's hands, Tan Qinghua's eyes began to turn white, and his struggle became more and more powerless. Dongqing Wudi finally let go and put Tan Qinghua on the ground. Deputy Commander Tan, who was almost strangled alive, coughed and gasped. For a moment he couldn't even straighten his body. The matter of Qianqing was originally an internal competition of the Sky Academy. The casualty index of the Sky Academy is not a decoration. If someone dies, the Sky Academy will naturally deal with it. When your son died, you jumped out to take revenge like a mad dog. If Qianqing died tonight, should I be like you? Do you think I will? Tan Qinghua gasped rapidly and did not speak. Although Dongqing Wudi was protective of his son to some extent, he also obeyed the rules. With his temperament, if Ning Qianqing really died in the hands of the other party in a fair battle, no matter who it was, Dongqing Wudi would not seek revenge. But Tan Qinghua could not do this, not to mention that he was his own son who he had high hopes for. And Qianqing is a member of my Border Control Corps, an elite who dares to fight with the enemy in the Border Control Corps. He is not a child soldier of your Eastern Theater of Operations. Even if the Sky Academy can't deal with this matter, it should be handled by the Border Control Corps. Tan Qinghua, what right do you have to touch my man? Dongqing Wudi's tone grew colder. Marshal is really mighty. Ahem. I admit defeat today. Tan Qinghua finally spoke. He had never been a talkative person. With Dongqing Wudi here, it was impossible to kill Ning Qianqing. In front of Horsewoman and Zhuang Huayang, Tan Qinghua could go crazy. But in front of Dongqing Wudi, if he dared to go crazy, Dongqing Wudi would definitely be crazier than him. At that time, the 300 elites of the Eastern Theater of Operations, including himself, would not be able to walk out of this villa. He believed that Dongqing Wudi definitely had the courage to kill. Since the situation was like this, Tan Qinghua did not bother to talk nonsense. He struggled to straighten up, took a deep breath and said, "Everything that happened here tonight, I will truthfully report it to the Army headquarters and the decision-making committee. Marshal, take care of yourself. I just came back from Yuzhou and I have no intention of going back to hold that damn meeting. I will report it. Do you think the old guys of the Prince Group can bite me to death?" Dongqing Wudi sneered rudely. Tan Qinghua slowly retreated and finally came under the parasol tree. He carried Raging Fire's body on his back and turned to leave. Dongqing Wudi stood where he was, squinting. There was no expression on his ordinary but clean face, but his eyes were full of killing intent. Dongqing Wudi did not slowly turn around until Tan Qinghua's figure completely disappeared. "Brother Dongqing, long time no see." Wang Xiaoyao, who had watched a wonderful show, walked over with a smile and handed Dongqing Wudi a cigarette. "We met in Yuzhou at the beginning of the year, didn't we?" Dongqing Wudi took the cigarette, glanced at Wang Xiaoyao and suddenly said, "Qianzong took the heir of your Wang family of Beihai to the desert of Beijiang?" Wang Xiaoyao froze and the temperature in his eyes quickly dropped. He held the cigarette in his mouth, looked at Dongqing Wudi seriously and said, "As far as I know, even within the Wang family of Beihai, this is a secret." "How did you know, brother?" "Now almost everyone knows what they should know." "Is this a secret?" Dongqing Wudi smiled and said, "Congratulations. If Tianzong's trip is successful, Wang Xingxiao's reputation as a young heavenly son will be unshakable. Whether the number one of the young generation is surnamed Wang or Gu, it will be clear." Wang Xiaoyao frowned tightly and remained silent. Dongqing Wudi did not say more. Looking at Zhuang Huayang coming from the gate of the villa, he took the initiative to reach out his hand and said with a smile, "Headmaster Zhuang, long time no see. Marshal, you guard the border and work hard for the country. Thank you for your hard work." Zhuang Huayang smiled and shook hands with Dongqing Wudi. The 6 groups in Zhongzhou State were divided and united. When there was no conflict of interest, they were always very polite to each other. But tonight, Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang had the same demand, so there was more or less some sincerity in the politeness. "Thank you, Headmaster, tonight." Dongqing Wudi shook Zhuang Huayang's hand hard and said solemnly, "Everyone has their own needs. It's what we should do." Zhuang Huayang smiled and pointed to the villa. "Let's go in and have a seat. Xiaoyao, come with us." "Forget it. Brother Dongqing, Headmaster, if there's nothing else, I'll take you a tong back. Let's catch up another day." Wang Xiaoyao shook his head. He had wanted to see Qin Weibai, but the news that his elder brother Wang Tianzong and nephew Wang Xingxiao had gone to the desert of Beijiang had spread like wildfire. Obviously, there was something wrong with the intelligence system of the Wang family of Beihai. This matter could be big or small, but if it was not dealt with as soon as possible, it would always make people feel uneasy. Zhuang Huayang glanced at him and nodded with a smile. Wang Xiaoyao left the villa in a hurry with Wang Yuetong, who walked to his side in silence. Dongqing Wudi took a deep look at Wang Xiaoyao, moved the corner of his mouth and whispered, "This King Xiaoyao of the Wang family of Beihai is not as simple as he looks." Zhuang Huayang smiled and said nothing. No matter how complicated Wang Xiaoyao was, it was the business of the Wang family of Beihai. It had nothing to do with him, so he did not want to say more. Dongqing Wudi looked at Li Beidian, then at Horsewoman, and then his eyes fell on Ning Qianqing. "Qianqing, where is Tianlan?" Li Beidian, who was watching silently, thought of the conversation he had with Ning Qianqing when they first met. At that time, Li Beidian asked Ning Qianqing what his code name was, and Ning Qianqing replied that he was a man of sacrifice. "Who's man of sacrifice?" Dongqing Wudi, Ning Qianqing, Li Tianlan? The answer seemed to be obvious. "He's upstairs. I'll call him." Ning Qianqing took out his mobile phone. "Sorry, I had some private business upstairs, so I'm late." Li Tianlan's voice suddenly sounded from the door. Dongqing Wudi's body slightly stiffened, and a dazzling brilliance flashed in his pupils. He took a deep breath and slowly turned back. In his sight, Li Tianlan, with a calm expression, just walked out of the door and met his eyes. "Tianlan?" Dongqing Wudi called out, and his voice, which had always been cold and murderous, trembled slightly at this moment. Li Tianlan subconsciously frowned and whispered, "Marshal Dongqing?" Dongqing Wudi's voice just now almost covered the entire Yonghua Villa district. Li Tianlan was not deaf, so he naturally knew who the only stranger in the yard at this time was. Dongqing Wudi, one of the top 10 contemporary experts of Zhongzhou State, the god of massacre. This was definitely an unexpected meeting, but what surprised him more was Dongqing Wudi himself. In his impression, the military marshal known as the god of massacre should be the kind of man who was more than 2 meters tall, burly, with a beard and a ferocious appearance. But the man in front of him had enough momentum, but his appearance was not the god of massacre at all. Dongqing Wudi was not handsome, but he was definitely not ugly. In particular, his face was extremely clean. It was not the kind of clean without a beard, but his face did not have the vicissitudes and hardships that a middle-aged man should have. It was so clean that there seemed to be no trace of time. If it were not for the white hair at his temples, Even if someone said that he was just a young man in his 30s, Li Tianlan would believe it. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath. In a very short time, the cigarette butt in his hand had been unconsciously crushed by him. He subconsciously took a step forward and suddenly said, Tianlan, how about going back to Zhongyuan province with me? Li Tianlan looked inexplicable. He did not know what this uncle god of massacre was doing and could not answer for a while. Marshal, why are you in such a hurry? Since you are here, you should at least say hello to the owner of this place, right? Go in and have a seat first? Zhuang Huayang laughed in a low voice. His eyes flickered as if he knew something, but he did not seem to know what. Thinking of the phone call he had received from Zhongyuan province, Zhuang Huayang had thousands of speculations in his heart, which were simply wonderful. Yes, go in and have a seat first. Dongqing Wudi suddenly realized his gaffe. He coughed awkwardly and walked into the villa. Horsewoman had taken out the tea set from the living room and was ready to make tea. Dongqing Wudi was not in the mood to appreciate the foreign girl's tea ceremony. He looked at Li Tianlan and was about to speak. Qin Weibai, who did not choose pajamas like Li Tianlan but changed into casual clothes, had already walked down the steps. Marshal Dongqing, you came to visit in person. Sorry for not going out to greet you. Qin Weibai said in a soft tone. Her tone had a trace of charm that she herself did not realize. Her beautiful face, which was almost unreal, was red. Although her hair had been combed, it still looked a little messy. At this moment, Qin Weibai was no longer the cold and strong spokesperson of Samsara Palace. Charming and languid, she looked exactly like a little woman who had just been moisturized. All the people present were experienced. In this situation, how could they not know what had just happened between Qin Weibai and Li Tianlan? It was estimated that only Qin Weibai and Li Tianlan did not know how many loopholes their supposedly flawless cover-up were. The corners of Zhuang Huayang's mouth twitched. He lowered his head, sighing at the carefree nature of the young couple, but also feeling a little weird. Dongqing Wudi glanced at Li Tianlan with a strange look. When he saw Qin Weibai approaching, he subconsciously stood up and made a gesture of greeting. Marshal, why are you so polite? Qin Weibai raised her eyebrows and naturally sat down beside Li Tianlan. This is to thank you. Dongqing Wudi said in a deep voice. Thank you for what Samsara has done for Zhongzhou State and the Border Control Corps in recent years. I hope Boss Qin can tell the Palace Master that Zhongzhou State hopes to continue to cooperate with you in the future. As for tonight's little misunderstanding, it's just a few idiots who don't understand the overall situation making trouble. The decision-making committee will punish Tan Qinghua, He Ping and others. This is our sincerity. So, tonight's matter is solved? Qin Weibai asked with a smile as she took the tea from Horsewoman. Dongqing Wudi hesitated for a moment and said slowly, after tonight, the Zhong family and the Tan family will not use official means to pursue this matter. As for privately, he didn't finish but he didn't need to. No one could do anything to the two wealthy families in private as long as they didn't get evidence. That's good. Qin Weibai said softly, holding the teacup. Tonight, Tan Qinghua came to Yonghua Villa and was stopped by Horsewoman. Because of the official relationship, once the two sides fought, it would be a foreign master against the official of Zhongzhou State. Once the official name was gone, even if they fought to the death, it would be a personal grudge. Boss Qin and Tianlan? Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while, and finally couldn't help asking. The living room seemed to be quiet for a second. Then Qin Weibai's natural and unrestrained voice sounded. Her face was still red, but there was a trace of happiness and joy in her eyes. I'm already Tianlan's woman. He said he would marry me. Dongqing Wudi's face changed slightly. He touched his nose subconsciously and said with a wry smile, Congratulations, congratulations. It's good that you think so, Marshal. Qin Weibai said softly with a smile and gently fixed the collar of Li Tianlan's pajamas. Dongqing Wudi had nothing to say. At this time he really didn't know what to say to Qin Weibai, so he looked at Li Tianlan and asked, Tianlan, would you like to go back to Zhongyuan province with me? What? Li Tianlan's tone was calm, but there was some doubt in his eyes. He always felt that there was something wrong with the way Dongqing Wudi looked at him. He thought of the engagement that Qin Weibai had mentioned not long ago. His heart gave a little jump. Why do you ask so many questions? You're so fussy. You weren't so fussy before. Would our marshal harm a stinking brat like you? A rough and hearty voice sounded from outside the door. Li Tianlan suddenly turned back. A stout figure strode into the living room, looked at Li Tianlan and laughed. He was actually very tall, but his fat body could deceive people's eyes. The man had a beard and a bald head, completely looking like a middle-aged non-mainstream man. He left a deep impression wherever he went. Li Tianlan's eyes were full of surprise from the bottom of his heart. He said with a smile, "Uncle Lei, why are you here? Let me introduce myself again." The bearded man laughed and said, "Thunder God, the commander of the Guards Battalion of the Border Praetorian Corps, and also the Marshal's bodyguard. Now you can go to Zhongyuan with us without worry, right?" "Yes." Li Tianlan still had doubts in his heart, but he agreed without hesitation. "Then let's go." Dongqing Wudi, who had been sitting, suddenly got up, grabbed Li Tianlan's hand and directly pulled him out. He couldn't wait. "Happy New Year to everyone, it's the beginning of the month. Brothers with guaranteed monthly votes, give them to the Special Warfare Team. Asking for monthly votes." Chapter 67. Begging for monthly votes at the beginning of the month. Today's update is over 10,000 words. Give me those who have guaranteed monthly votes. Dongqing Wudi was in a hurry. This was something that everyone could feel. Li Tianlan was almost dragged out of the villa and out of the courtyard by him. Thunder God led the way, walking as fast as he could. The three of them quickly walked to an open space in the central area of the villa, and Li Tianlan was directly stuffed into the helicopter by Dongqing Wudi. The helicopter rotors roared up after a while and flew higher and higher. Li Tianlan, who had taken a helicopter for the second time in his life, was confused. He looked at Dongqing Wudi sitting opposite him and looked at him seriously, and then at Thunder God who was driving the helicopter. He was full of questions, but he didn't know where to start. "Uncle Thunder." Li Tianlan was silent for a while. He didn't know what to say to the military marshal in front of him, so he could only turn his head and call Thunder God. Thunder God's rumbling laughter rolled through the cabin, and it was clear and deafening in the roar of the rotors. "Don't worry, boy. I don't have time to catch up with you. Just stay here. Marshal and I won't hurt you." "What? Don't you trust us?" Li Tianlan smiled and said no more. For him, most people in the world could not be completely trusted, including Dongqing Wudi in front of him. But Thunder God was an exception. When he was 17 years old, when he walked out of the camp on the border for the first time, it was not his grandfather or any veteran in the camp, but Thunder God. Like today, he sat in the cabin and Thunder God drove the helicopter. It was dark outside the window. That year, from the southwest to the northwest, from the jungle to the desert, Li Tianlan slipped from the peak state. From beginning to end, Thunder God was by his side. The other party knew most of his secrets. If he had wanted to harm him, he would have had countless opportunities to do so every single day during that 1 year. In the past, he could give his life to Thunder God countless times. Today, facing Thunder God, what couldn't he trust? Li Tianlan's heart was steady and his eyes were calm. "Tianlan, you and Bosch Qin." Dongqing Wudi, who was sitting opposite Li Tianlan, hesitated and finally said, "How did you and Bosch Qin meet?" Li Tianlan was stunned and whispered, "When I came to Huading, she was the first person I saw." "Elderly arranged it?" Dongqing Wudi's clean face did not change, but his eyes were tangled, and he seemed to be a little depressed. Li Tianlan nodded. He was not surprised that Dongqing Wudi knew his identity. Thunder God was Dongqing Wudi's bodyguard, so the marshal naturally knew what he knew. Dongqing Wudi took out a cigarette, took a deep drag, shook his head and said subconsciously, "How did you and her?" Li Tianlan seemed to hear something wrong in his tone. His eyes narrowed and his expression became more and more indifferent. Seeming to realize that his tone was not right, Dongqing Wudi smiled bitterly, looked at Li Tianlan and said, "Tianlan, come and sit next to me." "That's good. I'm airsick and don't dare to move around," Li Tianlan said with a smile and sat still. He was not disgusted with this legendary marshal of Jianghu state. Dongqing Wudi had a mixed reputation in the dark world. Some people thought that his approach was hot-blooded and heroic, while others thought that his approach was insane. But Li Tianlan thought that Dongqing Wudi's every move did not have too deep meaning. He was just bloodthirsty. Such a person was a homicidal maniac in small fights, and when he killed a lot, he would become a killing god. Dongqing Wudi was definitely not a good person, but he was extremely good to his own people. Ning Qianqing could make him give up the meeting of the decision-making committee and come to Huading with a phone call, which could prove this. The fact that the Border Guard Corps was dead set on following him and advancing and retreating together with him also proved this point. He was not a good person, but he was a real general, a real commander. He was strong, iron-blooded, and domineering. For nearly 2 decades in Jianghu state, Dongqing Wudi alone propped up the backbone of the border of Jianghu state. Such a person, no matter what his international reputation was, at least in the eyes of the people of Jianghu State, he was a well-deserved hero. Li Tianlan couldn't feel bad for such a person, but now Dongqing Wudi looked at him in such a strange way. When he heard that Dongqing Wudi asked him to sit down, he subconsciously resisted. Dongqing Wudi stared at Li Tianlan for a while, and his eyes seemed to be a little sad. He nodded, looked away and said softly, "Your father and I are very good friends." There was a trace of indescribable bitterness in his tone. "He saved my life and also saved the old master. If it weren't for your father, I don't know what the Dongqing clan would be like now." Although few people know about this, the people of the Dongqing clan will not forget and dare not forget. The Dongqing clan is willing to repay this kindness at any cost. Tianlan, can you understand? Li Tianlan's mouth twitched. He instinctively felt that there was something wrong with Dongqing Wudi's words, but he didn't know how to say it. He looked up at Dongqing Wudi seriously and said calmly and sincerely, "From my standpoint, it's not a question of whether I can understand or not. We should thank the marshal and the Dongqing clan for their righteousness." Your standpoint? Hey, your standpoint. Dongqing Wudi laughed at himself and seemed to lose all interest in talking for a moment. He shook his head wearily and said softly, "The reason why I took you to Zhongzhou in such a hurry is that the old master wants to see you. The old master used a favor from many years ago to invite an extraordinary person back, hoping that he can show you the way." Tianlan seized the opportunity. Li Tianlan's heart trembled for no reason. Looking at Dongqing Wudi, who had closed his eyes to rest, he nodded silently and stopped talking. The helicopter shuttled in the air. It was dark outside the window, and only the sound of the wind whistled in the rotation of the rotors. Overnight, he tested the attitude of the academics and inadvertently walked into the Dongqing clan, the leading force of the giant group. The road ahead was dark. What would happen tomorrow? Li Tianlan closed his eyes. In his mind, there seemed to be footsteps from a distant place, echoing in the depths of his heart. It was very light and very fast. That was the footsteps of destiny. Zhongyuan Province. Luojing. It was nearly 4 o'clock in the morning when the helicopter landed. Li Tianlan, who closed his eyes to rest but didn't fall asleep, followed Dongqing Wudi out of the helicopter and found himself at the foot of the mountain again. In front of him was a neatly paved two-way lane, stretching all the way up from the foot of the mountain to an unknown place. The straight poplars on both sides stood by the roadside, making the road deep and mysterious. In front of the helicopter, a row of cars was parked quietly. 4 dark Mercedes-Benzes surrounded a solemn car whose name Li Tianlan couldn't name. The headlights softly illuminated the road ahead. Around each Mercedes-Benz stood 4 burly men, all in black suits. They stood beside the light and shadow of the headlights and stood silently with their hands on their abdomens, but they had a steady momentum as dignified as a mountain. These were all elites and perhaps none of them was lower than the ice-condensing realm. Li Tianlan observed silently and followed Dongqing Wudi to the amazing motorcade ahead. In front of the luxury car whose name Li Tianlan couldn't name, an old man standing in front of the car saw Dongqing Wudi coming over and immediately came over with a smile. He ignored Dongqing Wudi, just looked at Li Tianlan and said with a soft smile, "Are you young Master Li?" The old man was slightly fat with slick back hair and neatly combed hair. He was dressed in a tang suit and cloth shoes. He was clean and his eyes were kind. It was easy to make a good impression. "I'm Li Tianlan." "I'm not young Master Li." Li Tianlan smiled and said, "What's your name, old man?" "Tianlan, this is Uncle Lin, one of the old master's bodyguards in those days. Now he is the steward of the family." Dongqing Wudi took the initiative to introduce him in a calm tone. The light in front of him shone on his face, and no one could see his expression clearly. "Hello, senior," and Li Tianlan reached out and shook hands with the old steward politely. Because of the mysterious and forbidden Dongqing Huangtu, Li Tianlan was very interested in the Dongqing clan, and he also learned some superficial information from Ning Qianqing. Before Dongqing Wudi served as the commander of the Border Control Corps, it had always been Dongqing Hongguang, the old master of the Dongqing clan, who supported the family. The old master was also one of the marshals of Jianghu State and also entered the decision-making committee. In terms of status, he was 1 level higher than the current Dongqing Wudi. At his peak, he was the nominal second-in-command of the Jianghu State military, but in fact he was the first in charge of the daily work of the military. In the military, his ranking was second only to the president of Jianghu State, and he was a real giant and a big shot. Dongqing Hongguang's bodyguard in those days could absolutely be said to be a real expert. "Don't stand on ceremony, young Master Li. Welcome to the Dongqing clan. Senior said with a smile, looking very kind. Young Master Li, the old master and the master are waiting for you. Please get in the car. Uncle, and Dongqing Wudi suddenly said, give me a car. I still have something to do, so I won't go to the old master's place. I'll go and have breakfast with him later. Senior agreed with a smile and gave Dongqing Wudi a Mercedes-Benz. Dongqing Wudi took a deep look at Li Tianlan, strode into the Mercedes-Benz with Thunder God and drove away. Li Tianlan calmly watched the Mercedes-Benz go away. Under the guidance of Senior, he got into the luxury car of an unknown brand. Senior drove the motorcade all the way up the mountain. The road wound all the way up, deep and calm. Occupying a mountain to be king. Such a word suddenly came to Li Tianlan's mind, and then he smiled bitterly. According to Ning Qianqing, the whole Zhongyuan province was the territory of the Dongqing clan, which was the real top wealthy family in Zhongzhou state. Now the Dongqing clan just divided a mountain as their headquarters. How could it be called occupying a mountain to be king? The motorcade gradually sped up. The noise behind them faded away. Lights finally appeared in front of them. A super large modern villa appeared in Li Tianlan's sight. The villa was 4 stories high and extremely wide. On the quiet top of the mountain, lights surrounded it. The entire villa became more and more dazzling and magnificent. In front of the villa was a large courtyard that had been transformed. It was neatly and reasonably planned with gardens, rockery, pools and jungles. The scenery was quiet, and the fragrance of flowers was overflowing. The night wind blew, wrinkling the pool, ruffling the flower beds and ruffling the jungles. In a trance, Li Tianlan even felt that he had come to another world. He had been to the garden party, and the scenery in the garden party was also very beautiful, but that was a club. Here, however, was a private house. At this moment, Li Tianlan looked at everything in front of him and felt nothing but shock. Let's go. The old master is inside. Don't be nervous, young Master Li. Senior took Li Tianlan out of the car and led the way to the villa. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. He was not nervous, but he felt a little uncomfortable standing in front of the top wealthy family in Zhongzhou state for the first time. In the courtyard, several patrols in black suits were carefully observing the surrounding environment. When they saw Senior, they all bowed respectfully. Senior looked indifferent. He took Li Tianlan all the way forward, pushed open the door of the villa and went straight in. The decoration inside the villa was equally magnificent. But Li Tianlan's eyes were focused on the 2 people sitting in the small reception room. A gray-haired old man. A kind-looking old monk in a kasaya. The old man was about 70 or 80 years old. He was thin, and although he had white hair, he was extremely energetic. His eyes were even more majestic, and he had a kind of strong aura without anger. He was murderous and had the same origin as Dongqing Wudi. Li Tianlan confirmed the old man's identity at once. He was Dongqing Hongguang, the old master of the Dongqing clan. Although the old man did not have the title of God of Massacre, he was also decisive, cold-blooded, and cruel when he was young. The Dongqing clan had been like this since the beginning. Every generation was bloodthirsty, and Dongqing Wudi's generation could be said to have reached the peak. As for the monk beside the old man, Li Tianlan did not know him. Young Master Li is here. Senior pushed the door open and said with a smile, looking at the white-haired old man in the living room. The old man had already noticed Li Tianlan behind Senior. His eyes were astonishingly bright and he laughed and said, Tianlan, come here, let me have a good look. Li Tianlan walked over and opened his mouth, but did not know what to say. He could only bow slightly and said with a smile, Hello, old master. What old master? Dongqing Hongguang stared at him and said, Call me grandpa. I've been friends with your grandpa for many years. It's not too much to ask you to call me grandpa, is it? Li Tianlan was a little embarrassed. He subconsciously touched his nose and opened his mouth, but he could not say anything. Dongqing Hongguang did not embarrass him. His bright eyes became softer and softer and he suddenly said, How is brother Li? In the blink of an eye, you've grown up so much. I haven't seen my brother for a long time. Grandpa is fine. Li Tianlan nodded. If he had something to say, he would never say much. In front of such a sophisticated big shot, the more he said, the more mistakes he would make. Dongqing Hongguang nodded and said with a smile, Come on, let me introduce you. This is Great Master Wu Wei. You may not have heard of this name, but you must have heard of the Great Soaring Temple, right? Great Master Wu Wei is the living Buddha with the highest seniority in the Great Soaring Temple. Even the current abbot of the Great Soaring Temple has to call him martial uncle. The Great Soaring Temple. Li Tianlan had naturally heard of this name. It was a martial arts force with a reputation only slightly worse than that of Mount Shu and Jade Pool. It practiced both Buddhism and Taoism, and its Buddhist incantation of 9 words was even more powerful. There were monks and Taoist priests in the Great Soaring Temple. Although it was a temple, the current abbot of the temple was a Taoist priest. His Taoist name was Tathagata, and he was one of the top 10 contemporary experts in Jianghu state. Taoist Tathagata's martial uncle? This was a real expert. Li Tianlan bowed slightly and said softly, "Greetings, Great Master." Amit Ba. Great Master Wu Wei smiled and put his palms together to return the salute. Looking at Li Tianlan, he suddenly laughed and said, "Benefactor, do you believe in destiny? Do you believe in karma?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and suddenly thought of Xian Xuanzi. The opening remarks of these two people were basically the same. I believe it or not. Li Tianlan chose his words carefully and said seriously, "Great Master, can you see my karma?" My karma? Great Master Wu Wei hesitated and put his palms together without saying a word. He seemed to be in a dilemma. "Great Master, just say it," Li Tianlan said directly. Dongqing Wudi had already said on the plane that the Dongqing clan invited an eccentric person today to show him the way. Naturally, he would not stand on ceremony. If he really met a master in metaphysics, it would be of immeasurable help to him in the future. "I see the karma of the donor." Great Master Wu Wei raised his head, took a serious look at Li Tianlan, and then lowered his head. "Great Master?" Dongqing Hongguang frowned slightly and couldn't help calling out. Great Master Wu Wei hesitated again, lowered his eyelids, put his palms together and said, "This donor has gone against the general trend and forcibly defied the natural order. I'm afraid he will die young and miserably in 10 years at most." 10 years at most, miserably. Dongqing Hongguang's expression changed dramatically, but he was not angry. There was only worry in his eyes. Xian Xuanzi of Taoism sect and Wu Wei of Buddhism sect could be said to be the real grandmasters of metaphysics in Jianghu state. The former was at least utilitarian, so it was easier to invite him. But the latter was a real free spirit. If it weren't for the fact that Great Master Wu Wei owed the Dongqing clan a karma many years ago, he would not have been invited today. But now he was invited, and the other party said that Tianlan would die miserably. What the hell was this? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly, but his expression did not change at all. He just said calmly, "Great Master, do you have a solution? Everything depends on God's will." Great Master Wu Wei chanted the name of Buddha and said meaningfully, "Originally, the donor's fate was unsolvable and destined to be miserable. But about 20 years ago, the donor's fate was changed. I'm not sure what will happen in the future." Li Tianlan nodded expressionlessly, stood up and said, "I'll go to the bathroom." He got up and walked out of the small reception room. Signorin, who was standing in the living room, immediately came out and said with a smile, "What's the matter, young Master Li?" Li Tianlan nodded seriously. "Although I know it's impolite to say this, if possible, I still hope that the Dongqing clan will throw the old monk out." "Why?" Senior An's face froze. Charlatan, pretending to be mysterious. Li Tianlan shook his head and said disdainfully, "His fate was changed more than 20 years ago? *CKU, I'm not 20 this year. Fuck you." Oh, sorry, the update is late. Today's 2 chapters are over 10,000 words. Please understand. Chapter 68. Great Master Wu Wei? A charlatan? Still pretending to be mysterious? Signorin was directly stunned. What was all this? Great Master Wu Wei, the highest elder of the Great Soaring Temple, became famous even earlier than Xian Xuanzi, the eccentric of Haotian Taoism. In the past 20 years, Xian Xuanzi had risen to fame and was gradually becoming the first man in metaphysics. But no matter how famous Xian Xuanzi was, some top seniors would never forget Great Master Wu Wei of the Great Soaring Temple. They could be said to be the only 2 metaphysical grandmasters in the world. Xian Xuanzi intentionally or unintentionally dealt with the top wealthy families of Zhongzhou State and the Hidden Dragon Sea. As long as the people who invited him were important enough, he would not be refused. At least he could give a few words of beneficial advice. Great Master Wu Wei, on the other hand, was truly free and unfettered in the world. He was a mysterious figure. Buddhism focused on predestination and karma. In recent decades, Great Master Wu Wei was not moved by power or money. He almost walked all over Zhongzhou State. He was like a living Buddha. He was willing to talk about karma to ordinary people and to point out the right path for some promising young people. There was a saying in the top circle of Zhongzhou State. As long as it was predestined, the living Buddha would answer all requests. Great Master Wu Wei had been famous for decades. Not to mention earlier, in the past 20 years, there were 4 people who were known to have received his guidance. 18 years ago he advised Situ Tsangyue to go north alone. The hidden god of Jianghu state appeared in Mount Taibai. 15 years ago he advised Hua Qingfeng, an expert, to enter Yuzhou. Azura path split, the shadow sect rose in the capital, and Hua Qingfeng took charge of the security department of Jianghu state. Now, more than 80% of the guards around the big shots in the Hidden Dragon Sea came from the shadow sect. 10 years ago Lu Shuanghua, a senior intelligence officer of the Prince Group, was hunted down because he was framed. He fled to Jiangnan and met Great Master Wu Wei by chance. He was advised to take root in Jiangnan province. Lu Shuanghua lived in seclusion in Mount Lu. 8 years ago, he joined the Wang family of Beihai in a high-profile manner and established the largest civilian intelligence organization in southern Jianghu state, Jiangnan Society. 3 years ago the Shadow Sting Force, the largest and most mysterious special forces in Jianghu state, was established. Wang Zhaoyang, one of the core members of the Wang family of Beihai and the commander of the Shadow Sting Force, went straight to the Great Soaring Temple on the second day he took office, just to thank Great Master Wu Wei in person. 20 years, for people, for giants of the dark world of Jianghu state. Whether Great Master Wu Wei intended it or not, no one dared to say that Xin Xuanzi had surpassed Great Master Wu Wei in metaphysics based on the achievements of these 4. The words of these 2 were basically equivalent to prophecies. This was something that many people acknowledged. Over the years, Senior had heard many legends about Great Master Wu Wei and seen many people's worship and admiration for the living Buddha. He had never thought that one day a young man would disdainfully say that the living Buddha was a charlatan. Was there something wrong with this kid's brain? Or did he drink too much tonight? Elder An's heart trembled. He didn't know what to do. This brat was too ruthless. He was definitely doing this on purpose. Among the people present, except for Li Tianlan, no one was lower than the thunder-shocking realm. No matter how low Li Tianlan's voice was, it could not escape the ears of Great Master Wu Wei and Dongqing Hongguang. He said it to Eldarin, but it was no different from pointing at Great Master Wu Wei and cursing. Tianlan, don't talk nonsense. The corner of Dongqing Hongguang's mouth twitched. He looked at Great Master Wu Wei apologetically and said softly, Great Master, Tianlan just came from a small place and hasn't seen much of the world, so, if I didn't know where he came from, how could I say that he went against the general trend? Great Master Wu Wei turned the Buddha beads in his hand and smiled kindly. Li Tianlan hesitated a little, turned around again and walked back to the small reception room. He sat down opposite Great Master Wu Wei and said calmly, Great Master, I'm sincerely convinced that I went against the general trend. But about the birth destiny, I can only think that you're talking nonsense. Dongqing Hongguang glared at Li Tianlan and hesitated to speak. Great Master Wu Wei was indeed an eminent monk. He was good-tempered to a certain extent. He said with a smile, Why? I'm less than 20 years old this year. Great Master said that my birth destiny was changed more than 20 years ago. More than 20 years ago, I wasn't born yet. How could I have a birth destiny? Li Tianlan said calmly. When it came to fate, people would always think of some false theories, but there were still experts who could really grasp a trace of the trajectory. At the beginning, Li Tianlan really thought that Great Master Wu Wei was a charlatan. But when he thought of Elder An's eyes and Dongqing Hongguang's performance just now, he was a little confused. A top wealthy family like the Dongqing clan couldn't be fooled by any charlatan. But the so-called birth destiny had too many loopholes. Benefactor, do you believe in destiny? Great Master Wu Wei asked again the question that Shen Xuanzi had asked and he had just asked. Li Tianlan frowned slightly. In the villa of the Dongqing clan, his mood seemed to relax a little unconsciously, and his mood swings became more and more obvious. You don't actually believe it? Great Master Wu Wei chuckled and looked at Li Tianlan. You don't believe in destiny, so you don't believe that someone has changed your birth destiny for you. Li Tianlan was silent. Just a few words about the mandate of heaven and the birth destiny had already made him dizzy. He looked at Wu Wei. Although he still didn't understand what he meant, it was obvious from his face that he didn't intend to say anything more. Li Tianlan picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. The slightly bitter and cold tea flowed down his throat and into his stomach. He suddenly said, Great Master, if I'm really doomed to die a horrible death, can what I've been asking for all my life come true? What did he ask for all his life? It was to let his grandfather and those veterans walk out of the border again. It was to let Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun stand on the top of Zhongzhou state again. It was to let the reputation of the god of war family spread throughout the dark world again. 10 years later, if he really died a horrible death, could everything he had been pursuing succeed? At this moment, Li Tianlan suddenly found that he could face the possible death calmly. But what he had been asking for all his life was what he couldn't let go of. Yes. Great Master Wu Wei hesitated for a moment and finally spoke in a concise tone. Li Tianlan laughed, and his eyes were bright without any haze. So, although I'm not reconciled to it, it's not too bad. It's worth it. The old monk took a deep look at him and didn't speak. You're so young. What's worth it? Don't talk nonsense here. Dongqing Hongguang's face darkened, and he reprimanded Li Tianlan mercilessly. His white hair was flying, his eyes were sharp, and his momentum soared in an instant. Li Tianlan didn't feel warm in his heart. Although it was the first time they met, the old master's behavior showed that he really didn't treat him as an outsider. Great Master, if Tianlan's birth destiny is really changed by someone, what will happen in 10 years? Dongqing Hongguang stopped looking at Li Tianlan and looked directly at Great Master Wu Wei. His tone was calm, but his eyes were earnest. Great Master Wu Wei shook his head. I don't have any good suggestions. There's still a long time. It depends on benefactor Tianlan's own luck. Dongqing Hongguang's heart sank. Although he didn't hear any pessimism from the old monk's mouth, there was no optimism either. Dongqing Hongguang was a little worried about gains and losses. He didn't give up and asked, is there really no solution? Return to the mountains and forests and don't care about the world. Great Master Wu Wei turned the Buddha beads in his hand and said calmly. Dongqing Hongguang gave a wry smile and glanced at Li Tianlan. Sure enough, he didn't change his expression as if he hadn't heard it. There was no difference between having such a method and not having it. I'm leaving. Great Master Wu Wei suddenly stood up, looked at Dongqing Hongguang and said with a smile, you and I are destined to meet in this life. If you don't mind, how about giving me a ride? Li Tianlan, who was about to get up and see the old monk off when he heard that the old monk was going to leave, stopped and sat back on the sofa. It was obvious that the old monk wanted to talk to Dongqing Hongguang alone. Dongqing Hongguang was a little hesitant, not about whether to see him off, but about whether to let the old monk go down the mountain. Great Master Wu Wei was elusive. This time, the Dongqing clan could invite him up the mountain because of a cause and effect many years ago. For the Dongqing clan it was a great favor. But such a favor was exchanged for such a result from the old monk. Dongqing Hongguang was really depressed. He stood up with a wry smile and walked out of the small reception room with the old monk. When they were about to step out of the reception room, Great Master Wu Wei in front of them suddenly turned around, looked at Li Tianlan and said with a smile, I'd like to give you a piece of advice. I'm afraid there will be a disaster in the near future. You should be careful and prudent. Li Tianlan was stunned, nodded and said sincerely, Thank you, Great Master. Great Master Wu Wei smiled and turned to leave. When he walked out of the gate of the villa, Dongqing Hongguang, who was unwilling, hesitated a little and finally said, Great Master, is it a good thing or a bad thing that Tianlan's, his birth destiny has been changed? Walking in the courtyard on the top of the mountain in the deep night, Great Master Wu Wei glanced at Dongqing Hongguang with a smile and said softly, His birth destiny has just been formed. Now it seems that it's not much better. Destiny is not static, but there is a general trajectory. Changing one's birth destiny is probably the difference between 10 deaths and 9 deaths. It's not easy to change one's destiny against heaven and earth and fight for life with heaven and earth. Then, Dongqing Hongguang's face was gloomy. Don't be too pessimistic. Now it's a narrow escape. Who knows what will happen in 10 years? Great Master Wu Wei chuckled and said, Donor Dongqing, I'll give you a word of advice. Let nature take its course and don't force it. As for Donor Tianlan, after he graduates from the Sky Academy, he can come to Mount Qingyun in Lin and be my neighbor. It's good for him. Lin was the capital of Jianghu province. Mount Qingyun was located on the bank of the West Lake. It was an excellent place with good feng shui. Dongqing Hongguang nodded and said helplessly, I can see that the boy is stubborn. Great Master, what if he doesn't go? His birth destiny has been formed, and his destiny has been determined. How can it be up to him? Great Master Wu Wei smiled casually and reached for the car door, intending to go down the mountain. Dongqing Hongguang's heart skipped a beat and he suddenly asked, Great Master, who changed Tianlan's birth destiny? Great Master Wu Wei paused and turned to look at Dongqing Hongguang with deep eyes. He got into the car. When the door was about to close, a faint voice rang in Dongqing Hongguang's ears. I changed it. Thank you for 544722292 Big Yuan Bao reward. Chapter 69. When Dongqing Hongguang walked back to the small reception room, he was obviously a little absent-minded. Li Tianlan was a little surprised, but he couldn't say anything. The hand on the clock was about to point to 5 o'clock in the morning. Looking at Dongqing Hongguang sitting on the sofa and meditating, Li Tianlan stood up and tentatively said, "Old master, if there's no other arrangement." He didn't finish his words and he couldn't finish them. How could he go on? In the whole Dongqing clan he was familiar with no one except Thunder God. Now he faced the old master of the Dongqing clan alone. What should he say? Go back to Huading without any arrangement? It was too impolite. Moreover, the other party invited Great Master Wu Wei to come and give him some advice. Although he didn't get any good words, the Dongqing clan's affection was obvious. It seemed a little inappropriate to leave now. But if I don't leave, will he arrange a place for me to rest? He doesn't regard me as an outsider. Li Tianlan thought he was a very reserved person and couldn't do such a thing. Oh, I forgot you, boy. Dongqing Hongguang's serious face relaxed slightly. He looked at Li Tianlan with a hearty smile. The old man looked calm and collected, but Li Tianlan felt uneasy. The old man's eyes were so strange, as if he was looking at a treasure. That kind of soft and surprised look appeared on an old man, and Li Tianlan instinctively got goosebumps. Come with me. Dongqing Hongguang patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder and went straight upstairs. Li Tianlan wasn't sure if the villa had an underground space, but the ground level was 4 stories high. Such a large luxury villa naturally had an elevator. Dongqing Hongguang took Li Tianlan into the elevator and went all the way up. Metaphysics is metaphysics. It exists, but it doesn't represent everything. I'm old, and the older I get, the more I believe in fate. But at the same time, I also believe in the saying that man can conquer nature. In the elevator, Dongqing Hongguang suddenly opened his mouth. He looked at Li Tianlan and said flatly, "Boy, I won't fool you. Great Master Wu Wei is arguably one of the most famous metaphysics grandmasters. What he said is a reference, even a very high reference value. With your temperament, you shouldn't be depressed by his words. But I'm afraid you'll go to the other extreme. You have a long life. Don't really think you have 10 years to live like that. It's not worth it. It's just stupid." Li Tianlan was stunned. He really didn't expect that Dongqing Hongguang would say this to him. He smiled and said calmly, "I won't be affected by a few words. No matter what happens in 10 years, I have to do what I have to do." Dongqing Hongguang's mind was in a mess. He nodded and said no more. The words that the old monk Wu Wei threw at him before he left were still echoing in his mind. Li Tianlan's birth destiny was changed by him. 20 years ago. What did this mean? At the very least, he could guarantee with the lives of his whole family that this matter had absolutely nothing to do with the Li family. Then how did Great Master Wu Wei know about Li Tianlan? And it was Li Tianlan who had not been born. Old Master Dongqing was upset for a while. When dealing with this kind of metaphysics grandmaster, the most terrible thing was that he didn't finish his words, which could make people want to hack him to death. The elevator reached the 4th floor. Dongqing Hongguang took a deep breath and walked out of the elevator. On one side of the elevator was a row of small stairs, about 1 story high, with a delicate small door at the end. "Come on," Dongqing Hongguang said and walked up the steps. Li Tianlan followed silently and watched the old man open the door. The night wind poured into the villa. A vast and boundless night appeared directly in front of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was stunned. Behind this door was not a secret room but the rooftop of the villa. Dongqing Hongguang opened the door and walked out. Li Tianlan followed closely behind. The rooftop was large and clean, surrounded by white jade railings, exquisite and gorgeous. The wind was slightly strong and cold, which made people's minds suddenly clear. The light was dim as night and dawn alternated. Li Tianlan leaned on the white jade railing and looked around. Everywhere he looked, there was lush greenery, wide roads, dense forests and vast plains. Standing there and looking, everything in his line of sight was downward. Only he was at the highest point, looking down at everything around him from the perspective of a bird's eye view. Li Tianlan was silent, but his heart was surging with emotions. "Tianlan, what do you think a man should pursue the most in his life?" Dongqing Hongguang stood beside Li Tianlan, lit a cigarette, took a big drag and asked in a gentle tone. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. In this situation he suddenly thought of a poem. Without hesitation he said it. "When you reach the top, all the mountains are small." Dongqing Hongguang laughed and said heroically, Yes, to reach the top, this is a man's life pursuit. He pointed to the mountain under his feet and said with a smile, Tianlan, what do you think of the Dongqing clan? Li Tianlan had nothing to say. In his heart it was not a clan but a mountain. The villa where Dongqing Hongguang lived was located at the top of the mountain. On the way up there were some forks. Li Tianlan didn't think much of it at first, but standing at the top of the mountain, he found that the so-called Dongqing clan was more than just a villa under his feet. This was just the center. Around the top of the mountain, in different directions, there were villas with similar architectural styles. Li Tianlan was not sure how big the mountain was for the time being, but standing here and looking at it, the magnificent momentum was really admirable. The atmosphere of a wealthy family is well-deserved. Li Tianlan said softly, with a trace of longing in his calm tone that he didn't even realize. This was the first time he had come to the headquarters of a top wealthy family in Jianghu state. Everything in front of him brought him nothing but shock and desire. Dongqing Hongguang stopped smiling, but his boldness did not diminish. He said in a powerful voice, "This is my family, the Dongqing clan with hundreds of thousands of troops, the Dongqing clan with the power to lead a group, the Dongqing clan with nearly 20 large military enterprises, the Dongqing clan that can make dozens of senior military generals bow their heads, and the Dongqing clan with a market value of hundreds of billions." He patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder hard and said with a smile, "Do you want such a family?" The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. Such a question was so rude that no one could be flustered. He took a deep breath and said softly, "It's a lie to say that I don't want it." Dongqing Hongguang looked at Li Tianlan with a smile on his face. He could clearly feel the fire in the eyes of the young man beside him. This almost fanatical light was called ambition. Every man should have ambition. "Then I'll give you the Dongqing clan, how about it?" Dongqing Hongguang said softly, but the content was earth-shattering. Li Tianlan's body shook violently. He looked at Dongqing Hongguang with a stunned face. "You don't want it?" Dongqing Hongguang frowned slightly. His reaction was completely unexpected. "I can't afford it," Li Tianlan said with a wry smile. At this moment he was really a little scared and even felt that there was something wrong with the old man beside him. Give the Dongqing clan to him? He couldn't think of any other possibility except that the old man was crazy. "What? Didn't your grandfather tell you? You have an engagement with the Dongqing clan. After you marry Rushi, I'll give the Dongqing clan to you. Everything here is yours, including the border Praetorian Corps." Dongqing Hongguang said calmly. Li Tianlan felt a headache. He knew that he had an engagement, but his old man didn't say with whom. When he first saw Qin Weibai and felt her deep love, Li Tianlan even guessed that Qin Weibai was his fiancée. The Dongqing clan? In Li Tianlan's previous impression, it seemed to have nothing to do with him. The appearance of Thunder God tonight connected him with the Dongqing clan. Li Tianlan had a vague guess in his heart, but it was just a guess. Now that he heard Dongqing Hongguang admit it, the truth of the so-called engagement was revealed. Rushi? Dongqing Rushi? Li Tianlan thought silently. He had heard of this name for a long time. She was one of the core disciples of Jade Pool and the youngest daughter of Dongqing Wudi. She had exquisite bone and was a 19-year-old expert of the fire-flaming realm. She was even one place ahead of Li Baitian in the ranking of the top 10 experts of the young generation. When Li Tianlan heard this name before, he had always regarded Dongqing Rushi as an opponent he might meet in the future. As a result, his opponent became his fiancée. This change was too big. At least, Li Tianlan couldn't accept it for a while. He lit a cigarette and took a big drag. His mind was in a mess. "That's it. You still have a few days off, right? Stay in Zhongyuan for 2 days. I'll inform some old friends later. You and Rushi get engaged first and exchange rings or something. Isn't that popular among you young people now? I understand. You can get married after graduation." Dongqing Hongguang said quickly without waiting for Li Tianlan to react. He seemed to think of something happy and laughed strangely. His eyes were almost invisible because of the laughter. "Well, sorry, old master. I can't be engaged to Miss Dongqing, let alone marry her." Li Tianlan suddenly interrupted Dongqing Hongguang in a calm and indifferent tone. Dongqing Hongguang's laughter stopped abruptly. "You won't marry her?" He seemed to be in disbelief and asked subconsciously. "I won't marry her." Li Tianlan's tone was firm. Dongqing Hongguang stared at Li Tianlan, and his face suddenly became gloomy. He said coldly, "You are engaged. My granddaughter is talented and beautiful. In terms of appearance, temperament and talent in martial arts, among her peers, only the little demon girl of the Wang family of Beihai can compare with Rushi. You won't marry such a good match? Who do you want to marry? Why don't you marry her? If you dare not marry her, I'll have someone kill you, you little bastard. Li Tianlan touched his nose and smiled bitterly. Dongqing Hongguang's words were not polite at all, but he just didn't dislike it. He shook his head and said sincerely, Old master, I have a girlfriend and I will marry her. Dongqing Hongguang, who didn't understand the situation for the time being, was stunned and said casually, just break up. Don't talk so much nonsense. I tell you, you must marry Rushi. There is no room for negotiation. No. Li Tianlan said without hesitation. His words were light and breezy but resolute and decisive. Dongqing Hongguang's carefully trimmed beard curled up. He was flustered and exasperated, staring at Li Tianlan with disappointment. Damn it, my beautiful and pure genius granddaughter will marry you, and the whole Dongqing clan will be the dowry. How dare you say no? He breathed heavily. At this moment he really wanted to kill the little bastard. Even if you can't, you have to. The old man clenched the white jade railing in front of him and said, gnashing his teeth. Li Tianlan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He threw away the cigarette but in his hand, lit another one and handed one to Dongqing Hongguang. He said helplessly, Old master, to tell you the truth, I have a little potential. If there is no accident, there will be no problem for me to enter the invincible realm. I don't belittle myself. In terms of value, I still have some. But the Dongqing clan is, after all, a family with a heavenly son. It is not worthwhile to take out the whole family as the dowry for a son-in-law who may become an invincible realm expert in the future, right? Dongqing Hongguang was stunned. Heavenly son? What heavenly son? Before he had time to ask, Li Tianlan continued, and my identity is sensitive. This secret can't be hidden forever. Once others know that I'm from the Li family, I'm afraid the Dongqing clan will also face pressure. The Prince Group, Kunlun City, and even the Wang family of Beihai will probably be eager to attack me. My identity is now a big quagmire. Once it is exposed, it is easy to involve the people around me. On the contrary, the Dongqing clan is already so large. Even if I enter the invincible realm, I will not be of much help to the Dongqing clan. This kind of engagement is immature. Not only can I not help you, but I will also drag you down. Oh master, why do you insist? What nonsense is this? Dongqing Hongguang frowned and repeated the old tune. He was so persistent that it made people cry. You have an engagement with my granddaughter, so you must get married. The Dongqing clan at least needs its face, and it can't do something like putting the whole clan on the line just to win you over. The Dongqing clan will be you and Rushi in the future. It has nothing to do with winning you over. This is an engagement, understand? The Dongqing clan keeps its promise. We repay kindness with kindness. This has nothing to do with your background or your potential. These words were said with confidence, but Li Tianlan instinctively chose not to believe it. He silently smoked and whispered to himself, repay kindness with kindness, repay kindness with kindness? Old master, what do you think of my father's treason? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Dongqing Hongguang's expression changed. He took a deep look at him and said hesitantly, the inside story of that matter is complicated and many clues are unclear. I'm not talking about that. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the gradually brightening morning light in the distance and said calmly. Dongqing Hongguang was stunned and immediately understood what Li Tianlan meant. He was silent for a while and whispered, Tianlan, do you have a knot in your heart because the Dongqing clan didn't do anything? No, I'm just asking. Li Tianlan shook his head. I'm not being polite. I can understand. The Wang family of Beihai, the closest comrade-in-arms of the Li family, could choose silence and give up. It's reasonable for the Dongqing clan to stand by. Oh master, I was rude just now. Silence. Dongqing Hongguang was silent for nearly 5 minutes this time. He lit another cigarette and said calmly, I can answer this question. First, the friendship between the Dongqing clan and the Li family was very hidden. Almost no one knew about it except for the two sides. Second, that matter was of great importance. It was a game of the overall situation. The Dongqing clan represented the giant group. In that situation, the Dongqing clan couldn't represent itself at all. As soon as we spoke, everyone would think that it was the will of the entire giant group. He paused and continued, third, if the Dongqing clan had an invincible realm expert, we would have to ask the Li family for an explanation afterward. Unfortunately, we don't have such an expert. Fourth, the Dongqing clan secretly helped the Li family. Tianlan, you'll see what we've done later. Now is not the time to tell you. As for the engagement between you and Rushi, it was made by your grandfather and me. There's no complicated interest entanglement. We've waited for so many years, but you suddenly told me that you didn't want to marry her. Who would agree? Rushi is my granddaughter. You have to marry her whether you want to or not. Li Tianlan touched his chin. There seemed to be something wrong with this picture. His grandfather said that the family with whom he was engaged was very realistic. But how could Dongqing Hongguang's performance be realistic? He was simply letting his emotions affect his decisions. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly moved. He thought of what Dongqing Hongguang had just said and hesitated. If you have something to say, say it. Dongqing Hongguang glanced at him and said that Li Tianlan suppressed the story of the Li family and the Dongqing clan. At the same time, he quietly shifted the topic of the engagement to a topic he had always been particularly interested in. As for the engagement, it was better not to talk about it. He smiled and said, "Old master, can I ask you about someone?" "Ask about what person? Don't change the subject, boy." Dongqing Hongguang took a drag on his cigarette, his eyes puzzled. "Well, the Dongqing clan sacrifice you just mentioned, is it related to Senior Dongqing Huangtu? How on earth did he—" Ahem. Before Li Tianlan could finish his words, Dongqing Hongguang coughed violently. He seemed to be choked by the cigarette. He coughed so hard that he couldn't straighten up for a long time. Li Tianlan subconsciously walked over and patted the old man on the back. He said with a wry smile, "I just accidentally heard some of Senior Dongqing Huangtu's deeds. If you don't want to say it, then forget it." Dongqing Hongguang waved his hand with difficulty and said in a hoarse voice, "Who did you just say?" "Senior Dongqing Huangtu." Li Tianlan knew that he might be suspected of rubbing salt in the wound, but he hesitated and said it again. Dongqing Hongguang straightened up and looked at Li Tianlan with a complicated look in his eyes. Li Tianlan braced himself to look at the old man, feeling a little creepy for no reason. "I don't know the person you're talking about." Dongqing Hongguang finally said, "There is no such person in the Dongqing clan. As for outside the Dongqing clan, I've never heard of this person." Chapter 70. Since coming to the Dongqing clan, Li Tianlan had encountered more accidents than accidents. He was a little confused about Great Master Wu Wei's claim that he changed his fate. Now Dongqing Hongguang told him that the Dongqing clan did not have Dongqing Huangtu. Li Tianlan felt a little uncomfortable. In terms of combat capability, Dongqing Huangtu definitely deserved the title of Heavenly Son. If such a person did not die, the reputation of the Dongqing clan could even catch up with that of the Wang family of Beihai in a few decades. But such a Heavenly Son died of siege and betrayal, which was definitely the most painful scar of the Dongqing clan. When Li Tianlan mentioned Dongqing Huangtu, he could understand and accept that the people of the Dongqing clan would be angry, sad, or in pain. But he did not expect that Dongqing Hongguang would say that he had never heard of this person. Of course, Li Tianlan didn't believe it. Not to mention how weird Dongqing Hongguang's reaction was. Even Qin Weibai couldn't lie to him, and there was no need to fabricate a non-existent Heavenly Son to fool him. Was it a taboo in Zhongzhou state? Li Tianlan was thoughtful. What did Dongqing Huangtu's past and death mean? "Old master, have you really never heard of this person?" Li Tianlan did not give up and asked again. In the beginning, wanting to know more about Dongqing Huangtu was just one of his interests. But now his curiosity was aroused. What on earth did he do back then? Even his own family members claimed that he did not exist. It was simply incredible. No. Dongqing Hongguang's voice was hoarse and his eyes were blank and confused. In an angle that Li Tianlan could not see, he chuckled and said calmly, "Tianlan, where did you hear this name? What else do you know about this person?" "From a friend. Senior Huangtu was besieged and died." Snap. Before Li Tianlan finished speaking, Dongqing Hongguang's hand suddenly tightened on the white jade railing. The jade railing was broken into powder in his palm. The powder slid down his palm, fluttered, and was blown away by the wind. Dongqing Hongguang was expressionless and pale. Li Tianlan shut up subconsciously. With the old master's reaction, it was obviously not appropriate to talk about Dongqing Huangtu. But this dead Heavenly Son had taken root in his heart and gave birth to countless possibilities. "Anything else?" Dongqing Hongguang suddenly asked. Li Tianlan glanced at him and shook his head. He suddenly thought, since Dongqing Huangtu was besieged and died because of betrayal, then who was it that besieged him? Who had betrayed him? Were these the enemies of the Dongqing clan or his own? Would the Dongqing clan have the same enemy as him? If the answer was yes, Then Li Tianlan seemed to have found a way to take advantage of Dongqing Rushi even if he didn't marry her. In his sight, a black Mercedes-Benz slowly drove along the mountain road into the courtyard and stopped in front of the main entrance of the villa. When the car door opened, Dongqing Wudi and Thunder God, who had left at the foot of the mountain a few hours ago, got off. A very beautiful woman got off with them. Li Tianlan was stunned. Was this Dongqing Rushi? It didn't look like it. The woman looked to be about 25 or 26 years old. She was plump and beautiful, and her eyes were gentle. She wore a pair of exquisite gold-rimmed glasses, and a faint smile hung at the corner of her mouth. Her every move revealed a kind of steadiness and calmness. Dongqing Rushi, who was 19 years old this year, could be called a girl, but the one in front of him was a beautiful young woman. Let's go down for dinner. Dongqing Hongguang glanced down and said in a low voice. It seemed that his mood was also affected by the mention of Dongqing Huangtu. Li Tianlan felt a little apologetic and followed Dongqing Hongguang downstairs in silence. Almost at the same time when they walked out of the elevator, Dongqing Wudi and the other two also walked into the villa. Seeing his father and Li Tianlan, Dongqing Wudi was stunned. Then he quickly walked over and whispered, "Dad." Thunder God didn't follow. The beautiful young woman that Li Tianlan had just met smiled and called him Grandpa. She glanced at Li Tianlan and nodded with a smile. Her smile was warm and elegant. It was a kind of pure gentleness that only women had, like a clear spring, sweet and irresistible. Li Tianlan's heart sank. Was it really Dongqing Rushi? There was something wrong with her attitude. Beside him, Dongqing Hongguang was in a low mood, but he didn't forget to introduce her. He said calmly, "Tianlan, this is my granddaughter, Dongqing Qiuqi. You can call her sister from now on. She works in Huading now. If you need anything in the future you can ask her." "Hello, Sister Qiuqi." Li Tianlan felt a little relieved and took the initiative to extend his hand with a smile. As far as he knew, although Dongqing Hongguang was still in charge of the Dongqing clan, the old master was only in charge of the general direction. In fact, the patriarch of the Dongqing clan had become Dongqing Wudi. This top family that dominated Zhongyuan was also prosperous, but Dongqing Wudi only had two daughters. The one in front of him was undoubtedly the elder daughter, and the younger one was Dongqing Rushi. Although Dongqing Qiuqi looked young, she should be close to 30 or even in her early 30s. Was it because Dongqing Wudi had no son that the old master gave the Dongqing clan to his son-in-law as a dowry? It seemed better to give it to someone from other branches than to outsiders, right? Working in Huading? Li Tianlan was a little curious. He didn't know what Dongqing Qiuqi was doing in Huading. "Hello, Tianlan. Let's exchange contact information later. You can call me at any time if you need anything. I'm not far from your campus." Dongqing Qiuqi smiled and reached out her small hand to shake Li Tianlan's. She was a gentle and elegant woman who spoke softly and was very comfortable to get along with. Li Tianlan nodded with a smile. "Where's Rushi?" Dongqing Hongguang suddenly asked. "Why didn't she come for dinner?" The smile in his eyes flashed away. He chuckled and said, "Why? Is the girl shy?" Li Tianlan's body slightly stiffened. He didn't know how he felt about his fiancée whom he had never met. Dongqing Wudi was also a little embarrassed. The dignified god of massacre of Zhongzhou state dodged the old master's eyes and whispered, "Rushi just returned to Yuzhou." What happened? Dongqing Rushi was a little confused. Didn't they agree? Why did she suddenly go back? Yesterday, his precious granddaughter said that she wanted to meet her fiancé. As a result, the fiancé came, but she left. What was going on? Dongqing Wudi became more and more embarrassed and subconsciously glanced at Li Tianlan. In fact, it was not that Dongqing Rushi didn't want to. Dongqing Wudi was very clear about the engagement between the two families. His daughter might be a little confused and nervous, but she didn't resist much. She even acquiesced. At least she didn't object to them getting along with each other for a while. He could only blame himself for being so excited that he accidentally mentioned Li Tianlan's girlfriend when he picked up his daughter. Then things became like this. In such a scene, his daughter was not jealous, but she must feel wronged. Dongqing Wudi's mouth moved and his heart was in a mess. This matter might be a knot in his heart if he didn't deal with it well. "There's something urgent in Yuzhou, so I have to go back." She said that she would go to Huading to find Tianlan after a while. Dongqing Wudi gave a half-true and half-false explanation. In fact, Dongqing Rushi also said that she didn't want to get engaged too early. She hoped that she and Li Tianlan would get married after graduation. However, Dongqing Wudi didn't dare to say that. If he did, he might face the anger of the old master. Not only the old master, but Dongqing Wudi himself also couldn't wait for the marriage of the two children. Forget it. Let's eat first. Dongqing Hongguang was even more confused. He didn't ask more and walked to the dining room. The breakfast was depressed and silent. Li Tianlan sat down next to Thunder God and only cared about eating and drinking. Dongqing Hongguang was absent-minded. After eating a bowl of porridge he didn't eat much. When Li Tianlan put down the bowl and chopsticks he also got up and said calmly, "Xiuqi, take Tianlan to rest. Let him stay with Rushi. I'll call Rushi later to ask about the situation." Okay. Dongqing Xiuqi smiled gently, looked at Li Tianlan and said, "Follow me." Li Tianlan said goodbye to Dongqing Hongguang, his son and Thunder God in turn, and then walked out of the villa. Dongqing Xiuqi waited quietly outside. When she saw Li Tianlan come out, she smiled and looked him up and down with a strange look in her eyes. She didn't say anything. Li Tianlan's heart ached badly. Did this woman think of him as a gigolo who coveted the power of the Dongqing clan? The corner of his mouth moved. When he was about to speak, Dongqing Xiuqi, who was gentle to the bones, chuckled and said, "Tianlan, treat my sister better in the future, okay? Otherwise I'll deal with you. You're in Huading, so it's very easy for me to deal with you." "Big sister, I haven't even seen your sister. Isn't it too early to say this?" Li Tianlan complained in his heart and said casually, "What does Sister Qiuqi do in Huading?" "The mayor of Wudong New District." Dongqing Qiuqi smiled and said, "Even your Sky Academy is also within the scope of Wudong New District. Although we can't control it, we can still exert influence." The mayor of Wudong New District. Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Qiuqi, who was smiling gently in front of him. He couldn't connect this position with her. In Huading, Wudong New District could be said to be the most important district. The mayor was usually a member of the standing committee, who was a senior official at the level of deputy governor. Moreover, it was a very high position. In this case, Dongqing Qiuqi, the second in command, was only one step away from the standing committee. He wondered if she was 30 years old this year. The Dongqing clan is really full of talents. It deserves to be a family that has produced a heavenly son. Li Tianlan sighed softly, but he was carefully observing Dongqing Qiuqi's expression out of the corner of his eye. Dongqing Hongguang refused to reveal anything, but Dongqing Qiuqi should know something, right? Dongqing Huangtu was her uncle? Heavenly son? What heavenly son? Dongqing Qiuqi was stunned and asked curiously. "Isn't His Highness Dongqing Huangtu a heavenly son?" Li Tianlan asked seriously. He knew he shouldn't ask this question, but he didn't know why he always instinctively wanted to know more about this person. Dongqing Qiuqi's face was blank. It was a real blank, not a superficial emotion hidden behind sadness, anger, and pain. She looked at Li Tianlan and asked curiously, "Who is Dongqing Huangtu?" When Li Tianlan walked out of the villa, Dongqing Hongguang also called Dongqing Wudi and Thunder God into his study. In the study, the old master finally stopped hiding his feelings, and his expression became gloomy. Dongqing Wudi coughed. Looking at his father's face, he didn't dare to speak, but just gave Thunder God a wink. Thunder God twitched slightly and looked at Dongqing Wudi. He opened his mouth but no sound came out, but the shape of his mouth was clear. "Damn you." Dongqing Wudi glared and clenched his fists, his eyes flashing fiercely. Thunder God immediately gave in. Looking at Dongqing Hongguang, who was sitting in the chair in silence, he took the initiative to say with a dry smile, "Godfather, Rushi really has something urgent in Yuzhou. Don't be angry. When she finishes dealing with it, she will definitely go to Huading to find Tianlan." "Not because of this." Dongqing Hongguang shook his head, suddenly looked at Thunder God and said in a deep voice, "Lei, when you took Tianlan to the desert, did you say anything to him that you shouldn't say?" Thunder God was stunned for a moment and muttered to himself, "Something that I shouldn't say?" Then he shook his head and said with certainty, "No. Dad, what the hell is going on?" Dongqing Wudi asked, picking up the teacup and pouring a glass of water for Dongqing Wudi. "Just now, when we were on the rooftop, Tianlan asked me a question." Dongqing Hongguang frowned tightly and said in a low voice, "He wants to know something about Huangtu that year? Something about that year?" Crack. Dongqing Wudi's hand shook, and the teacup in his hand fell directly to the floor and broke into pieces. How is this possible? The expression of this marshal of Zhongzhou state, who could always be calm in the face of anything, changed dramatically, and he subconsciously raised his voice. How did he know about Huangtu? Dongqing Hongguang glanced at him and said nothing. "Aren't you curious about what that kid meant by, that year?" Thunder God suddenly said, "What does he know?" "He said that Huangtu was besieged that year." How on earth did he know this name? There's something wrong with this kid. Dongqing Hongguang whispered, and his face was gloomy, making it impossible to tell what he was thinking. It's not him who's wrong, it's Qin Weibai, and it can only be her. Dongqing Wudi suddenly said. Qin Weibai? Dongqing Hongguang froze for a moment, and then said, is it the one from Samsara? That's Qianlan's girlfriend. It can only be her who told Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi nodded. Mentioning Qin Weibai gave him a bigger headache. What kind of nonsense was this? The point is, how did Qin Weibai know about Huangtu? How could she know? Thunder God sounded confused. At present, it can only be her who knows. It can't be Tianlan himself, can it? Dongqing Wudi asked in reply. The study suddenly became silent. The three of them looked at each other and could see a trace of panic and fear in each other's eyes. Go and check it out. Dongqing Hongguang suddenly said, I'm afraid she knows more than that. Send someone to check it out. We must find out what's going on. Dad, I'll talk to her myself. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath and said calmly. Dongqing Hongguang glanced at him and nodded. Be careful. Dongqing Wudi said, Dad, what about Great Master Wu Wei? It's okay. Don't worry. Dongqing Hongguang forced a smile. Chapter 71. When the morning sun rose and the darkness receded, a fierce battle that lasted nearly 5 hours came to an end. Light and darkness alternated. In the battlefield that spanned thousands of meters, the sharp sword intent and the violent fighting intent had yet to dissipate completely. Yellow sand was everywhere in sight, rising and falling with the strong wind. A large area of fire and the yellow sand almost merged into one, burning continuously. The long night had just passed. The temperature in the desert should be the coldest, but the blazing heat spread to every corner of the battlefield, making people breathless. This was the Dead Sea of Jianghu State, located in the south of Beijiang Province. It was the largest desert in the territory of tens of millions of square kilometers in Jianghu State. The Dead Sea Desert was famous for three things: the relic, the poplar, and the prison. Many people knew that in the depths of the Dead Sea, there was the most mysterious and heavily guarded prison in Jianghu State. There were even rumors among the people, but few people knew the specific location of the prison. The prison was codenamed Impasse and it lived up to its name. For the prisoners here it was an impasse. There was no hope, no goal, and no fantasy. They could only suffer here day after day and stay in the boring and maddening environment until they died. There were no ordinary prisoners here. Cold and cruel killers, ferocious mercenaries, terrorists, military spies, international thieves, and traitors. Every criminal had a relatively glorious past. Ordinary criminals were not qualified to be imprisoned here at all. The battle that had already ended took place near the Impasse prison, less than 2 kilometers away from the prison. In the environment of yellow sand everywhere, as the sun rose, the yellow prison gradually merged with the whole desert. There was no distinction between them. The wind rose and stopped. The yellow sand returned to the desert. On the battlefield, a young man who looked very young struggled to stand up and walked forward. The young man was handsome and in his early 20s. He was tall and slender and his temperament was steady and sharp. He deserved the reputation of an elegant child. However, at this time the battle that lasted for several hours had just ended, and his image was obviously a little bad. The clothes on the young man's body were almost completely torn. His upper body was bare with only a few pieces of cloth hanging on it. Bright red blood had already covered his entire upper body, and there was even a wound on his face that was bleeding. He dragged a broadsword in his hand. The body of the sword was simple and heavy, wide and long, and it was completely black. As he walked, the edge of the sword that pierced into the yellow sand directly cut a deep gully in his path. Just from this alone, one could see the terrifying weight of the heavy sword. His lips were tightly pursed while his expression was firm, and his narrow and long eyes seemed to still be burning with violent battle intent. At this moment he'd already thrown away his modest and calm facade, and he walked forward proudly amidst the vast expanse of yellow sand while emanating an arrogant and domineering aura that disregarded everything. He moved forward for 20 meters. He stopped in front of an old man who was lying on the ground, bowed deeply and said softly, "Thank you, Uncle Hua." The old man was actually not that old. At most he was less than 60 years old. His face was withered and his black and white hair was greasy and messy. He was dressed in gray clothes that were loose and shabby. It was the most standard outfit of a prisoner. At this moment he was sitting on the ground weakly. He looked miserable and miserable. He calmly accepted the salute of the noble young man in front of him and laughed at himself. I'm old and can't fight anymore. I've wasted a lot of my strength over the years. If I were younger, you might not be my opponent. Uncle Hua deserves the title of the first in the fire-flaming realm. I didn't win this battle and you didn't lose either. You deserve to be the strongest in the fire-flaming realm. The young man chuckled and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. For him, this battle was indeed a draw. Both of them were seriously injured. Although he seemed to be in a better state now, he was dozens of years younger than his opponent. If they fought to the death, the result would basically be mutual destruction. How could he say he won? How could he say he lost? The strongest in the fire-flaming realm? When the young man first heard this, he inevitably felt a little dissatisfied. But after the battle, he was so strong at this age and even suppressed him in the beginning. He was convinced of this kind of combat strength. He took a deep breath, put down the heavy sword in his hand and sat opposite the old man. He said seriously, Uncle Hua, how about going back to Beihai with me? In the future, I need you to guide me in my cultivation. No. The old man didn't even lift his eyelids and directly refused the tempting suggestion. He simply said, I'm fine here. I stay in a small space of 2 or 3 square meters every day and occasionally come out to look at the sand. I've been used to it for so many years. I can't afford the glory and wealth of the Wang family of Beihai. The young man opened his mouth and his eyes were complicated. He was the strongest in the fire-flaming realm, who could regard most of the peak of the fire-flaming realm as nothing. It was better to say that he had been imprisoned here for 20 years than to say that he had been locked up in the impasse prison for 20 years. Why bother? The young man smiled bitterly. The fighting intent in his eyes gradually faded, and his eyes gradually became gentle and clear. His whole person had a trace of gentleness that was inconsistent with the heavy sword beside him. He didn't look aggressive or aggressive at all. The old man didn't answer. No one knew whether he was unwilling or disdainful. The young man also fell silent. He had heard of the old man in front of him when he entered the fire-flaming realm a few years ago. Many people might have also heard of him. This was the strongest expert in the fire-flaming realm at that time. For many years, he had been the best whetstone in the eyes of some fire-flaming realm geniuses. But over the years, as far as he knew, it seemed that he was the only one who dared to use him as a whetstone. Whetstone? The young man frowned slightly. He didn't feel anything when he first heard this title. But when he saw the old man's current state and recalled the word, he suddenly felt it was a little harsh. How glorious was the old man back then? Known as the strongest expert in the fire-flaming realm, he had successively served as the deputy commander of the capital garrison, the deputy minister of the guard department of Jianghu state, the first deputy minister of the Ministry of Security, and the first deputy army commander of the border Praetorian Corps. He had followed 2 gods of war in Jianghu state. Whether in the era of Li Honghe or Li Guangtu, he was one of their sacred guards, codenamed Fireman. In the dark world of that era he was more than famous. But now he was locked up in the most mysterious prison in Jianghu state. Every day he holed up in a small space of only a few square meters. He couldn't even stretch his arms and legs. Used to it? How could he get used to it? The young man sighed softly. When the war god family collapsed, the role played by his family could not be regarded as despicable, but it was not related to the bright and mighty. Fireman's inner obsession and knot were hard to solve, so it was reasonable that he did not want to return to the Wang family of Beihai. Let's go. Fireman suddenly stood up and said, and then walked to the nearby impasse prison without looking back. Brother Fire, this is a good wine specially prepared for you. Aren't you going to have a sip? A gentle voice sounded. It was plain, but as soon as the words came out, they reverberated in the whole world nearby and were clearly heard from all directions. Fireman stopped and slowly looked back. In sight was still the same yellow sand, undulating sand dunes as far as the eye could see. On a sand dune 1,000 meters away, a tiny figure that looked like a black dot stood up. In an instant, everything in front of Fireman seemed to disappear, leaving only the small figure in front of him. The figure took a step forward and his figure became clear in an instant. The second step was taken. All the yellow sand nearby began to tremble and float. A storm suddenly formed in the desert, whistling and rotating around him. The third step. The storm was still. And he appeared in front of Fireman. This was a man whose specific age could not be seen at all. He had the steadiness of a 30-year-old, the vicissitudes of a 40-year-old, and the open-mindedness of a 50-year-old. He appeared beside Fireman with a chuckle. He was ordinary, but in a trance he seemed to have become the center of the whole world. It was an indescribable taste. He didn't need any momentum. As long as he stood there, he was the momentum. A kind of momentum that was abundant and majestic enough to shake the world, was like the coming wind and rain, like the dark clouds pressing down on the city, like thunder on the flat ground, like the surging tide of the deep sea, abundant and unstoppable. Sword Emperor of Jianghu State, the top expert of Jianghu State, the top expert of the world divine list, patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Tianzong. Fireman looked at him calmly without saying a word. Wang Tianzong raised the bottle in his hand and said with a smile, "Are you in such a hurry?" "He's in a hurry." Fireman pointed to the young man behind Wang Tianzong and said in a calm tone, "It doesn't matter." Wang Tianzong opened the bottle and said calmly, "All the land under the sky belongs to the king. Where can I break through? Where can I break through?" His words were calm, but there was a kind of extreme confidence between the lines. Fireman nodded, took the wine that Wang Tianzong handed over, and drank most of the bottle in one breath. The wine went into his stomach. The spicy feeling burned his heart and lungs. Fireman held his breath for a long time before he let it out. His face turned red and he said, "Good wine. I made it at home. Would you like to go back with me and have a taste?" "It's good enough." Wang Tianzong chuckled, his eyes deep. Fireman shook his head, glanced at Wang Xingxiao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, who was already sitting on the ground and meditating, and said blandly, "No, he's about to break through to the fire-flaming realm, and there's no need to go. It's really a waste here." Wang Tianzong said blandly, "In my impression, you're still the fireman who tried to go straight from the fire-flaming realm to the invincible realm. You dare to ignore the thunder-shocking realm and don't stick to the rules. Even if you're laughed at, you'll firmly walk out of your own martial arts path. You're not the miserable and decadent old man now. Brother Fire, come with me. There's still a chance now." "Chance?" Fireman took another big gulp, smiled bitterly, pointed to his face and said, "What chance do I have now? I'm almost 60 years old. For hundreds of years, have you ever seen anyone who entered the invincible realm at the age of 60? For hundreds of years, no one has tried to go straight from the fire-flaming realm to the invincible realm and regarded the thunder-shocking realm as nothing. 20 years ago, it seemed that you were the only one, right?" Wang Tianzong's tone was still bland. But Fireman heard something wrong. 20 years ago he was the only one who tried to go straight to the invincible realm. What about 20 years later? Do you think the path I took back then, can it be taken? Are there people like me out there now? Fireman asked seriously after a long silence. He might have a knot in his heart for the Wang family of Beihai, but for martial arts, even if he knew that he had no chance, he hoped to hear other people's comments and get their recognition. Now the world's #1 expert was in front of him, and he hoped to prove from Wang Tianzong that his efforts were not wasted. "I don't know." Wang Tianzong smiled bitterly. "Our paths are different. The path you took was unheard of, and even Senior Li didn't approve of it. If you don't enter the thunder-shocking realm, who knows what the real limit of the fire-flaming realm is? Your combat capability was comparable to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but you didn't touch the threshold from the fire-flaming realm to the invincible realm, did you? How can I know if you don't know?" His eyes twinkled and he said thoughtfully, "But now there is a madman outside like you. He is an assassin. Half a year ago he tried to go straight from the chi-controlling realm to the invincible realm. When he was close to success he failed and almost went into chi deviation. I don't know the specific situation. Brother Fire, do you want to go with me to have a look?" He jumped from the chi-controlling realm to the ice-condensing realm, the fire-flaming realm, and the thunder-shocking realm to the invincible realm. It was not too much to say that such a person was a madman. "No." Fireman still shook his head and simply said, "You said that our paths are different." Wang Tianzong sighed softly. Looking at the determination in Fireman's eyes, he didn't persuade him but whispered, "Brother Fire, do you think there is anything that Xingxiao can improve?" Fireman hesitated a little, nodded, and pointed to the yellow sand under his feet. Wang Tianzong immediately understood what he meant, shook his head and said calmly, "Underground? It's not necessary. Today the Wang family of Beihai doesn't need this method. Such improvement is tantamount to nitpicking, just like the invincible manual in the map of God of War of the Li family. When the Li family was at its peak, which God of War didn't think that the invincible manual was of little value. It's strong, but who is willing to practice it unless they are in a desperate situation? Now the Wang family of Beihai doesn't need its heir to take risks. The more stable, the better, not to mention the kind of risk of death or even death. Fireman drank the last sip of wine, nodded, threw the bottle on the ground and turned away in silence. Wang Tianzong quietly watched Fireman's fading figure and suddenly said, "Brother Fire, don't you need an explanation for what happened that year?" "I can explain." Fireman calmly moved forward without looking back and said indifferently, "As long as you have a clear conscience." The muscles on Wang Tianzong's face twitched violently, and his eyes were bitter. "Brother Fire, do you have a clear conscience today?" He took a deep breath and continued to ask. "I've done my best today. What's there to be ashamed of?" Fireman asked in reply. Wang Tianzong let out a sigh of relief and nodded. "Thank you." Fireman didn't give in to Wang Xingxiao, which proved that Wang Xingxiao's fire-flaming realm had indeed reached the extreme, and he could smoothly break through to the thunder-shocking realm. He didn't need the hopeless cross realm to enter the invincible realm. Hundreds of years of facts had proved that step by step was the best choice. Fireman walked back to the prison in silence. From beginning to end he never looked back. That. Behind Wang Tianzong, Wang Xingxiao's happy voice sounded. Wang Tianzong calmly looked back and asked, "How is it?" Wang Xingxiao didn't speak but just reached out his hand. A dazzling electric light bloomed in his hand, and there was a faint thunder in the air. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes and nodded. "Let's go. There's one more thing to do. After that, we'll go to Huading. Your sister found a very good young man with wind and thunder veins like you. I want to meet him." "Is that the brother who saved Yuedong's life? You should thank him." Wang Xingxiao laughed and his tone was calm and confident. Wang Tianzong nodded and glanced at Fireman's back again, expressionless. "Let's go." He turned around and left directly. "Dad, where are we going now?" "Kunlun City." The figures of the father and son gradually disappeared. Fireman, who had never looked back, also came to the gate of the prison. The gate of the prison was made entirely of alloy with a password, which looked extremely complicated. The prison guard entered 5 passwords in a row. After the 5th door was opened, a closed space appeared in front of Fireman. Fireman stepped in without hesitation. The space in the closed prison was narrow, and one road after another appeared in front of Fireman. It was a dazzling maze just by looking at the exit. "Turn left." Fireman walked slowly. There was blood flowing down the corner of his mouth, and he reached out to wipe it away. He lowered his head and walked forward with his mouth tightly closed and his eyes were cold. Outside the prison he told Wang Tianzong the truth. He had a clear conscience in this battle. But what Wang Tianzong didn't know was that as early as 2 years ago, the strongest fire-flaming realm expert in his heart had been injured in another fierce battle, and the injury had not yet healed. At that time his opponent was a youth who was only 17 years old, a youth who was worthy of him putting his life on the line and everything he had to test. That battle also took place outside the maze. There was also only one bystander. The two fought fiercely for nearly 16 hours. Fireman was as steady as Mount Tai, but the boy broke through the fire-flaming realm and entered the thunder-shocking realm uncontrollably at the last minute. The boy won that battle. But fire-flaming realm against fire-flaming realm. The boy lost. For those who practiced the invincible manual, the outcome was so obvious and so cruel. On that day, Fireman clearly remembered that he stood in front of him, with his hands open and a bright smile. Fire and lightning kept rushing out of his body, burning and blooming. His realm retreated from the thunder-shocking realm to the fire-flaming realm, the ice-condensing realm, and the chi-controlling realm. In the large light and shadow, his smile was bright and firm, but he said lightly, "It's just starting over." In that brilliant and lonely light and shadow, the strongest young heavenly sun Fireman had seen so far destroyed his martial arts and started over. "It's just starting over." Fireman wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were warm. "Thank you for the monthly votes of a game of spring and autumn. If you have monthly votes, please give them to Special Warfare. Today's update of more than 9,000 words. Chapter 73. With tens of millions of square kilometers of land, Jianghu State was rich in resources and talented people. From an international point of view, everyone has a different view of the continent. Politically and militarily, Jianghu State was the most powerful country in the world. From the perspective of ordinary people, Jianghu State was the most mysterious and charming country in the East. In the eyes of the experts in the dark world, the vast Jianghu State, to put it bluntly, could be divided into 9 words. West Kunlun, North Taibai, Southeast City. In the hearts of the experts in the dark world, They were the three most powerful forces in Jianghu state. Kunlun city of Kunlun Mountain, Sai city of Taibai Mountain, and the border Praetorian Corps of Jianghu state. This was the backbone of Jianghu state's defense for the past 2 decades. It had been deeply rooted in Jianghu state for many years and was as stable as a rock. Other than the three superpowers, there was the Wang family of Beihai. This was a very special wealthy family in the world. For hundreds of years, both the Jianghu state government and the Wang family of Beihai had emphasized that Beihai province was a part of Jianghu state. But the fact was that very few people in the world thought that the Wang family of Beihai belonged to Jianghu state. This was a very strange phenomenon. The 160,000 square kilometers of Beihai province, from officials to military officers, were all appointed by the Wang family of Beihai. Even the top leader of Beihai province was selected by the Wang family of Beihai and then recommended to the decision-making committee. Among more than 30 provinces in Jianghu state, only Beihai province had such treatment. Even the residents of Beihai province would say that they were from Beihai instead of Jianghu state or Beihai of Jianghu state when they went out to places all over the world. This kind of strong sense of regional belonging was not uncommon at the provincial level. For example, most people from Guinness Island would say that they were from Guinness Island instead of Dongshan Island, and people from Gusu Island would say that they were from Gusu instead of Wuxia Island. But at the national level, in the entire Jianghu state, only people from Beihai province would say that they were from Beihai when they traveled around the world. This was the case even under normal circumstances. In the dark world, the experts would naturally separate the Wang family of Beihai from Jianghu state. It seemed that only in this way, when the experts of Jianghu state were mentioned, the foreign experts of the dark world would not feel so much pressure. Looking at the overall situation of the dark world, the most memorable ones were the masters on the divine and holy lists. The status of the God list could be said to be supreme. The holy list was second only to the divine list. There were a total of 30 people on the two lists, and they were the top big shots in the entire dark world. If Wang Qianzong of the Wang family of Beihai was added, 3 of the 4 invincible realm experts in Jianghu state were on the list, and all of them were on the divine list. The pressure was self-evident. If Wang Qianzong was excluded and the experts of Jianghu state were still extremely powerful, at least they would not make people feel desperate. On the same morning, when Wang Qianzong of the Wang family of Beihai went to Kunlun city, Flaming Fire, one of the 12 super masters of Samsara, also came to the top of Mount Taibai. The peak, which was nearly 3,000 meters high, was snow-white, magnificent and magnificent. Standing on the peak and overlooking the surroundings, one could see mountains covered in snow all year round. The white was quiet and peaceful, like a fairy tale kingdom, free of dirt and dust. It is indeed beautiful. It's even more beautiful than our headquarters. I just don't know what the future holds. Flaming Fire looked at the pure white snow and sighed softly. Are you thinking of your tribe again? A black figure stood beside Flaming Fire. He was slender and thin, and his whole body was shrouded in a large cloak. The hood of the cloak covered his face, making it impossible to see what he looked like. He stood quietly beside Flaming Fire with a long sword on his back. When he did not speak, he was like a strange shadow without any aura at all. But as he spoke, his whole body seemed to suddenly come to life, and there was suddenly a trace of extremely sharp sword intent all over him. His tone was soft and slow, but every word was like the sound of a long sword, showing off its sharpness. That's not a tribe. Flaming Fire's eyes were in a trance, but her tone was extremely calm. Standing in this place, it was indeed easy for her to think of the place she called home before she met the palace master. There was also dreamy white snow, a waterfall flowing down, and a cold pool that never froze all year round. But there was no laughter. That place was silent, solemn and rigid, like a fake landscape painting. The deathly stillness was devoid of any vitality, unlike here. Even in this world of ice and snow, it was still full of vitality. The black figure chuckled, and the sword intent echoed around him. He reached out and pointed forward, saying slowly, "There are about 2 kilometers left. Just go straight." Flaming Fire nodded and stepped forward. She had just taken a step. A warm voice with a hint of a smile suddenly rang out. It was calm and gentle, sounding refined and courteous. "There is a forbidden area ahead. What are you doing here?" Flaming Fire stopped and raised her head. A snow-white figure stood quietly on a small snowy hill a few dozen meters in front of him. He had white hair and white clothes, and he wore a silver-white mask. It was as if he had blended in perfectly with the snowy ground. He stood motionless as if he had been standing here for a long time, but also as if he had just appeared. At this moment he seemed to have become a part of the wind and snow on the mountain. He was everywhere but nowhere to be found. Flaming Fire's pupils contracted slightly, and for a moment she felt that she could not lock on the figure in front of her. If they were fighting, she would not even have the chance to take the initiative to attack. The other party had completely integrated with the surrounding environment. Once he attacked, it would definitely be a matter of life and death. This was the fighting state of a top assassin. He did not move, but he would kill with one blow. Although the white figure opposite her spoke in a gentle tone, he was obviously ready to fight. Ahem. The black figure beside Flaming Fire suddenly coughed softly. In an instant, the dense sword intent broke out on the peak of Mount Taibai. The wind and snow were turbulent, the sword intent was like a dragon, and the sword energy was like a rainbow. In front of Flaming Fire, the seemingly real Snow White was broken like a mirror in the sword energy. The snow was still snow and the white figure was still white. Everything became clear again. We are not enemies. Who are you? Before the white figure was about to attack, Flaming Fire took the initiative to speak. The white figure surrounded by wind and snow stared at the darkness in his sight. His eyes were solemn, but the smile on his face did not diminish. I'm Drifting Cloud from Sai City. How should I address you? Breeze. Drifting Cloud. They were the strongest assassin combination in Jianghu State. Both of them had the strength at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. They were known as the double walls of Sai City. Below the city lord, their individual strength might not be the strongest, but once they joined forces, they had the capital to be fearless. In the entire Sai City and even in the killer world, they were the real big shots. Flaming Fire nodded solemnly. Samsara, Flaming Fire. Drifting Cloud was slightly stunned. Before he could speak, the black figure continued, Samsara, Saint. Drifting Cloud's expression suddenly became solemn. Saint and Flaming Fire. Although they were both among the 12 supermasters of Samsara, their status was absolutely different. There was no doubt about Flaming Fire's strength and status. But among the 12 supermasters, Saint was the first supermaster. His mysteriousness was second only to the Palace Lord, and even his strength was the same. Since such a figure visited Sai City had to treat him with caution. Especially in the case that Sai City and Samsara Palace had no interaction before, the two supermasters of Samsara Palace suddenly came here. What was their purpose? What can I do for you? Drifting Cloud's expression was solemn, but there was doubt in his tone. We have a letter and we hope to hand it to Her Highness Hidden God in person. Flaming Fire said straightforwardly. A letter from Her Highness Palace Lord? Drifting Cloud asked attentively, and his tone became more and more solemn. The master of Samsara Palace was a mysterious figure in the whole dark world. Drifting Cloud did not think that she could have any interaction with his city lord. Thinking of everything that she had done in Billy State recently, Drifting Cloud seemed to have some speculations in his heart. Flaming Fire remained silent, showing an attitude of no comment. Drifting Cloud narrowed his eyes, adjusted the earphones around his ears and whispered something. Then he said to Saint and Flaming Fire, please? No matter what the two supermasters of Samsara came here for, they were guests, and it was always inappropriate to keep them out. The three of them walked all the way in the snow. About 2 kilometers later, a vast hall covered with snow appeared in front of the three of them. The hall was magnificent, and the buildings, which imitated the style of ancient palaces, stretched out unevenly, looking elegant and solemn against the white snow. A small number of flowers and plants were planted in front of each palace, most of which Flaming Fire could not even name. The brightly colored flowers and plants took root in the snow, making the snow whiter and the flowers more beautiful. The world of ice and snow had its own style. Flaming Fire, who came to Sai City for the first time, looked calm. But looking at the palace in front of her and the snow in front of her, there was an indescribable shock in her heart. It was not obvious, but it did exist. She subconsciously glanced at Saint beside her. Saint was wrapped in a black cloak. He was calm like a shadow floating beside her and did not say a word. Flaming Fire shook her head slightly, took a deep breath, and followed Drifting Cloud all the way into the main hall of Sai City. The main hall was called Changbai, which complemented the Changbai Peak in the Taibai mountain range. The interior decoration was simple and the space was large. 8 thick pillars carved with vivid patterns supported the roof. Under the extremely high ceiling, everyone inside felt extremely small. Inside the main hall, there were 2 rows of soft leather sofas arranged vertically. At the end of the sofas there were several steps. Above the steps, there was a long soft cushion which was obviously higher than the sofas below. A languid female figure leaned on the soft cushion behind, looking at Saint and Flaming Fire, who walked into the main hall with clear and indifferent eyes. Her figure was plump and soft and she wore a loose robe. A golden mask covered most of her face, revealing only her sharp chin and beautiful lips. The woman's clear and indifferent eyes flashed and she did not say a word. The sofas in the main hall were almost full of people. Roughly counting, there were about 30 of them. Each of them was dressed in snow white, with a mark of a golden mask embroidered on their chests. The mark was the size of a strawberry, shining magnificently in the soft light. Flaming Fire glanced around, keeping her composure. This was the Changbai Parliament of Sai City in Taibai Mountain, as well as the decision-making body of Sai City. In Sai City, Situ Tsangyue, the governor, had the highest decision-making and leadership power. But most of the time she rarely took charge of things and even did not show up. Every day she just accompanied the ice and snow of Changbai Peak and cultivated martial arts. In the case of Situ Tsangyue's silence, the 29 members of the Changbai Parliament were responsible for the daily operation of Sai City. In Sai City, which had less than 1,000 people, the 29 members could be said to be the real core of Sai City. The assassins of Sai City, the patriarchs of several wealthy families in the north, and the leaders of the special warfare system were all gathered together, and they controlled the highest voice of the special warfare system in the 3 provinces in the northeast of Jianghu state. Flaming Fire quietly looked at Situ Tsangyue on the soft couch. In that beautiful and lazy figure, she could only see endless confusion and loneliness. Among all the special warfare organizations in Jianghu state, Sai City could be said to be the most aloof one. For many years, they had stayed on the top of Taibai Mountain and controlled the overall situation of the special warfare in the northeast of Jianghu state. They did not expand, but they did not allow anyone to intervene. When something happened outside the northeast of Jianghu state, Sai City never took the initiative. Only when the high-level officials of Jianghu state made a clear request would they take action at once. After solving the problem, they did not ask for anything, but returned as soon as possible and continued to guard Taibai Mountain. As one of the special warfare giants of Jianghu state, the style of the whole Sai City was eccentric. They had no goals, no direction and no desire, so that they were somewhat aloof from the government of Jianghu state. It was precisely because Sai City's aloof and desireless state was in line with the interests of many people that the high-level officials of Jianghu state decided to hand over Setting Sun, one of the 12 murderous weapons, to Sai City instead of Kunlun City. She was in the invincible realm, controlled Setting Sun, ranked on the divine list and owned Sai City. Situ Tsangyue, the hidden god of Jianghu state, had too many things. But such a hidden god gave Flaming Fire the feeling that she was really at a loss, so much so that she did not know what to do. That was a very numb and even a little dull attitude towards life. She was passive and decadent, muddling along. Flaming Fire was puzzled, but she was still polite on the surface. She even bowed slightly and said calmly, "Greetings, Your Highness Hidden God. Why are you here, Super Master?" Situ Tsangyue, dressed in white, leaned lazily on the soft couch high above the main hall. Her tone was indifferent. "Here's a letter for Your Highness to read." Flaming Fire reached into her arms and took out an envelope. Situ Tsangyue waved her hand slightly. The air in front of Flaming Fire fluctuated. The weightless envelope in her hand suddenly rushed directly to Situ Tsangyue's tender white hand like a meteor. Flaming Fire's expression did not change. She stood there and waited. On the soft couch, Situ Tsangyue had opened the envelope and pulled out a page. The paper was obviously torn from a notebook, and it looked very irregular. There were only 11 words written on the pure white paper. The handwriting was delicate and elegant, and it was awe-inspiring. Desperate chase. 9 heavens bearing the wind. Li Tianlong. Situ Tsangyue's eyes flashed and she suddenly stood up. The paper in her hand turned into dust in an instant, fluttering in the air. Situ Tsangyue's eyes shone brightly like never before. With her action, all the members of the Changbai Parliament were completely focused. "Where is he?" Situ Tsangyue stared at Flaming Fire and asked. "Sky Academy." Flaming Fire said lightly. "What's the relationship between him and the Palace Master? Is the Palace Master in Jianghu state now?" Situ Tsangyue continued to ask. At this moment she seemed to have found her goal and direction. The powerful aura belonging to an invincible realm expert bloomed unscrupulously, grand and dazzling. "The Palace Master is still in Billy State. My boss asked me to bring this letter to your highness. Flaming Fire told the truth in an old-fashioned tone. Boss? Situ Tsangyue raised her eyebrows slightly and felt a little puzzled. Yes, my boss. But this matter can represent the will of the palace master. I see. Situ Tsangyue sat back on the soft couch and looked at the scraps of paper still floating in the air thoughtfully. The scraps of paper in the air finally fell to the ground. Are you Saint? Situ Tsangyue's eyes flashed, and her gaze suddenly fell on the black shadow beside Flaming Fire. Take off your cloak. Everyone in the main hall was shaken. If they could see the face of the most mysterious first supermaster in Samsara, no one would want to miss it. Why don't you take off your mask? Saint was motionless. His tone was indifferent and fearless. Situ Tsangyue's bright and condensed eyes narrowed slightly and she snorted coldly. In the quiet hall, there was a sudden wind. It rushed straight to Saint's face. Saint took a step forward, reached out and held the sword. The long sword on his back was suddenly unsheathed. There was a clanging sound between heaven and earth. In the hall, the swords of several experts rushed out of the sheath at the same time. The fierce clanging sound rushed out of the hall and echoed in the mountains. At the same time, it roared in everyone's heart. The sword intent was surging and growing endlessly. A smile gradually appeared in Situ Tsangyue's eyes. She whispered, "It's you." For a moment just now, she even suspected that this saint was the mysterious master of Samsara Palace. Now her guess was wrong, but it was not a loss to know the true identity of Saint. Saint loosened his hand holding the sword, and the clanging sound disappeared. He said calmly, "This sword is the sincerity of Samsara. Goodbye." He turned around and walked out of the hall. Flaming Fire followed him without saying a word. Outside the hall, the wind and snow were howling endlessly. In the hall, Situ Tsangyue looked at their backs silently and suddenly said, "Wait." She got up again. The whole hall fell into absolute silence in an instant. Situ Tsangyue's figure had rushed out of the hall. The endless wind and snow suddenly stopped. Only her figure moved forward in the white. Countless lifelike shadows drew a straight line behind her. The air was shaking violently, but there was silence between heaven and earth. Everything happened in an instant. Situ Tsangyue seemed to take only one step, but it also seemed to take many steps. When the shadows dissipated, she was already standing in front of Saint. Saint was motionless and even lowered his head as if he was in deep thought. The indifference in Situ Tsangyue's eyes faded, and her eyes were gentle. She chuckled and said, "Samsara used your identity as a sincerity, and I used my martial arts as a sincerity. Did you see it clearly just now?" "Thank you." Saint was silent for a long time. Then he bowed slightly and said in a dignified tone, "I owe you a favor." Only he knew what that moment meant to him. That was the real desperate chase. It was Situ Tsangyue's body movement in the invincible realm. All the essence of this body movement seemed to be vividly displayed at that moment. For people like Saint, who had stepped into the half-step invincible realm and was only one step away from the real invincible realm, that moment was like a bright light in the dark, and its importance was self-evident. "We're on the same side. Why are you so polite?" Situ Tsangyue smiled indifferently. She glanced at Flaming Fire and continued, "Tell your boss that I will send someone to Sai City." "Is it drifting cloud? Or breeze?" Flaming Fire asked subconsciously. Judging from Situ Tsangyue's attitude, she could be sure that the person she sent to the Sky Academy this time was an absolute big shot in Sai City. The leader of the assassination course group of the Sky Academy seemed to be settled. Breeze? Drifting cloud? No matter which one of them went, it could be said that it was condescending to go there. "It's neither." Situ Tsangyue turned around and said calmly, "It's tribulation." Not only Flaming Fire, but even Saint was shocked and his face changed dramatically. Tribulation. The only deputy governor of Sai City. The strongest chi-controlling realm expert. The lunatic who tried to enter the invincible realm in the chi-controlling realm half a year ago. He could be said to be the only lunatic in Sai City whose reputation was comparable to Situ Tsangyue's. The Lord of Shadow in the Dark World. The #1 assassin in Jianghu State. Tribulation was not on the list of the top 10 contemporary experts in Jianghu State. But if Tribulation was determined to assassinate, all of the top 10 experts would be doomed except for the first 3. Saint took a deep breath and looked at Situ Tsangyue, who was already standing under the Changbai Palace. He said with a smile, "She is really a great god. Zhuang Huayang will have a headache." Under the Changbai Palace, Situ Tsangyue did not look at the two leaving figures. She just looked up at the plaque hanging high in front of the palace and was lost in thought. Many years ago, the traitor who made Jianghu state suffer heavy losses and the man who made her life a success had personally inscribed 2 words on this plaque: Changbai. They knew each other until their hair turned white. But for many years, the hidden god of Jianghu state, who had been feared by countless people, had always been alone, unattached, and had no one to rely on. Situt Sangyua looked up at the plaque. Her expression was soft and her eyes were sad. Changbai, Changbai, if you are not here, who will I know in my life? For whom will I turn white? The chapter of nearly 6,000 words was posted late. Thank you, Yuan Yang, for the monthly ticket of Bodhi Fantasyland. Chapter 74. Different from Sai City, which stood aloof from worldly affairs, as the power center of the special warfare system of Jianghu state, Kunlun City paid attention to a majestic atmosphere in terms of scale and aura. It was also a city built in a world of ice and snow. The vast palaces of Sai City were the most conspicuous buildings. And Kunlun City was a real city. Kunlun City was located on the west side of the Kunlun mountain range, covering an area of dozens of square kilometers. It was built between Qingyun Peak and Linggu Peak, nearly 4,000 meters above sea level. It was covered with snow all year round, but the scenery was not monotonous and the climate was not cold. It snowed all year round, the climate was pleasant, and the flowers were blooming all year round. The scenery was picturesque. This was Kunlun City, the most peculiar place in the entire Jianghu state. The sun was setting. When the sun was about to set, on the road on the east side of Qingyun Peak, 2 figures walked slowly in the overwhelming snow. A young man and a middle-aged man walked side by side. Looking from a distance, they were like 2 black spots in the snow. If one did not pay attention, one would easily ignore them. The young man's footsteps were steady and powerful, and he walked very fast. He walked in the snow that almost reached his knees as if he were walking on flat ground. His movements were natural. Every step he took had a feeling that his body was stretched to the extreme, as if it was made by nature. Not to mention his physical condition, at least people would feel comfortable at first glance. The middle-aged man followed him casually, neither hurriedly nor slowly, but always kept walking side by side with the young man. The snow in the valley was blowing with the wind and it was cold. The middle-aged man in unlined clothes looked up at the seemingly endless snow in his sight, looking calm. "Sheng Xiao, can you hold on?" He glanced at the young man beside him and said in a steady tone. Wang Tianzong had just broken through and was seriously injured. He came to the snow mountain from the desert in one day. Even if he knew that his son was talented, he seemed to be a little worried. "I'm fine," Wang Xingxiao said with a smile, and every expression showed joy from the bottom of his heart. As the top wealthy family in the world, the Wang family of Beihai was too big, and Wang Tianzong was too busy. Among the young people of the Wang family of Beihai, he could be said to be the one who spent the longest time with his father, but the longest time was actually very short. Ever since he was young, his invincible father had always been silent and quiet, like a mountain peak that everyone could only look up to. This time, from the ocean to the grassland to the desert, and then to the snowy mountains, the father and son had been together day and night. It seemed that only at this time could he feel that his father's heart was very close to him, very close. He was no longer a young prodigy that others admired and valued. His father was no longer the invincible number 1 on the divine list and the leader of a wealthy family. It was simple and natural. Wang Xingxiao enjoyed such a journey from the bottom of his heart. No matter how hard and tired it was, he didn't mind. "Then hurry up." Wang Tianzong nodded and said in a calm tone. Wang Xingxiao agreed. His pace became more rapid and his body became more and more stretched. His every move was full of spiritual qi, revealing an almost flawless martial arts aura. Wang Tianzong still walked forward unhurriedly, but no matter how fast Wang Xingxiao walked, he could always walk side by side with him. In a trance, he didn't seem to be moving forward, but just standing there quietly. The snow under his feet and the snow-capped peak in front of him were retreating rapidly according to his will. The invincible realm expert who ranked first on the divine list seemed to have returned to nature, but no matter where he stood, he seemed to be the center of the whole world. The snow under his feet was getting shallower and shallower. A tall stone tablet appeared in the snow. The black stone tablet was 10 meters high and 3 or 4 meters wide, heavy and heavy. A few bright red words were engraved on the stone tablet. In the white snow, the black and red color looked extremely strange and dazzling. In the military forbidden area ahead, idlers stopped. The handwriting was wild and sharp, and every stroke showed a kind of sharpness and elegance that seemed to be flying out. Wang Tianzong stood in front of the stone tablet, staring at the handwriting on it and said softly, "The military forbidden area." "Well, the military forbidden area." He shook his head, continued to move forward and said calmly, "It's an eyesore." Wang Xingxiao had already taken out the heavy and broad sword behind him. A dazzling electric light lingered in his blade. Wang Xingxiao held the sword and chopped down. The blade rubbed against the stone tablet, and the flashing sparks flashed from top to bottom. Wang Xingxiao turned around and continued to move forward. There was a loud bang behind him. The stone tablet, which was 10 meters high, collapsed into countless pieces in an instant. Large pieces of stone flew and eventually sank into the snow. "Dad, are you sure that Kunlun City sent someone to attack Yuetong?" Wang Xingxiao, who had smashed the stone tablet, followed Wang Tianzong and asked softly. "I can only be sure that it was not done by Gu Xingyun." Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou State, the governor of Kunlun City, was also the top leader of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Of course, he had heard about the attack on his sister in Huading. If it was not done by Gu Xingyun, what did it have to do with Kunlun City? A good-for-nothing who can't even hang at the bottom of the holy list wants to rise to the top with a little cleverness. Idiot, it's ridiculous. Wang Tianzong twitched the corner of his mouth and said coldly, "Since they want me to come to Kunlun City so much, I'll come and have a look. If I don't follow their wishes, how can I catch their tail?" Wang Xingxiao was silent and thoughtful. He knew very well who couldn't hang at the bottom of the holy list. Gu Qianchuan, the first elder of Kunlun City. Wang Tianzong could say that he was a good-for-nothing, but he was not qualified to say anything. He was known as a young heavenly son and had entered the thunder-shocking realm, but any invincible realm master still needed to be looked up to by him. Gu Qianchuan? He frowned and muttered to himself. In general, Kunlun City was generally harmonious. But according to his father, it seemed that Gu Qianchuan united with outsiders to seize power, and the attack on Yuetong was just one of the steps. When did the fight inside Kunlun City become so fierce? Wang Xingxiao couldn't believe it. Gu Xingyun was so powerful that it was almost impossible for him to control the situation in Kunlun City. Just like the current Wang family of Beihai, there were conflicts and contradictions among the major branches and lineal descendants, but everything was under control. But Kunlun City, how long had it been rising? It had only been 20 years, and the internal contradictions were so fierce? How could it be possible? Wang Tianzong stopped talking. The snow under their feet became lighter and lighter. They could even see some plants and flowers, which were delicate and lovable against the white snow. "Is this close to the Dragon Vein?" Wang Xingxiao whispered. Kunlun City was windy and snowy all the year round, but the flowers were blooming, and the city was as warm as spring. All of this was because of the Dragon Vein under Kunlun City. Wang Xingxiao had heard some rumors. It was said that the Dragon Vein would move on its own, but the time and direction of movement were uncertain. The Dragon Vein of Kunlun City had existed as early as 50 years ago. What was more rare was that there were two rare earth veins where the Dragon Vein was located. It was the pattern of two dragons playing with a pearl. Because of this, the Dragon Vein stayed here for a longer time. But under normal circumstances, the Dragon Vein should have moved to another place 15 years ago, but it was locked here by Xian Xuanzi, the eccentric of Taoism. This lock lasted for 20 years, and it was also the beginning of Xian Xuanzi's fame. Since then, people really regarded him as a metaphysics grandmaster who was as famous as Great Master Wu Wei. The flowers were blooming here and the temperature was gradually rising. It could be seen that they were not far from the Dragon Vein in Kunlun City. "It's in front." Wang Tianzong's face was calm, but his tone was a little complicated. He whispered, "When I was a child, I learned swordsmanship here. There was no Kunlun City at that time. It was just a few thatched cottages. Things remain the same, but people have changed." He laughed at himself and whispered again, "Things remain the same, but people have changed." Wang Xingxiao was silent. When his father was a child, at that time, there was no Kunlun City in Zhongzhou State. There was only the War God family and the Li family. People said that where the Li family was, there must be a Dragon Vein. But in fact, where the Dragon Vein was, there must be a Li family. It was self-evident who his father had learned swordsmanship from. "Let's go." Wang Tianzong continued to move forward and looked up. Through the howling wind and snow. At the end of his sight, the outline of a city had gradually become clear from blurred. The setting sun on the horizon was trying its best to burn the last of its afterglow. The sky that was vaguely covered by the snow-capped peaks was a fiery red. The brilliant light sprinkled on the snow-capped ground, giving off an orange-yellow color. In his line of sight, the blizzard city between the two snow-capped peaks seemed to be glowing, revealing a kind of grand magnificence and majesty. The temperature in Wang Xingxiao's eyes gradually decreased, and he slightly sped up his pace. The retro city walls and city towers were getting closer and closer. Wang Xingxiao could even see the two teams of soldiers standing outside the city gate who were in charge of guarding. The soldiers were lined up neatly with serious and indifferent faces and loaded guns. They were guarding the city in the icy and snowy environment. Such a military appearance could be said to have high morale. Wang Xingxiao gently moved his body, and the snowflakes and dampness all over his body disappeared in an instant. Stop. At the city gate, some soldiers finally noticed the two travelers, who were walking in the wind and snow. Everyone's body tightened almost instinctively, and the guns in their hands were slightly tightened. Although the muzzles were not pointed at Wang Tianzong and Wang Xingxiao, the solemn killing intent had begun to brew. What are you doing? This is Kunlun City. It's the forbidden area of Zhongzhou State. Don't you see the stone tablet? The two teams of soldiers rushed over neatly, and a captain with the rank of captain shouted angrily. Your stone tablet is of poor quality and I broke it. Wang Tianzong glanced at him and said in a cold tone. How dare you? The captain sneered, but before he went on, he saw Wang Tianzong's eyes sweep over. His eyes were not so fierce or domineering but ordinary. But under this glance, the captain suddenly lost all his courage. He opened his mouth but could not make any sound for a while. Who the hell are you? The captain's heart beat wildly for no reason. He took a deep breath and asked in a deep voice. The next second he appeared on the city gate tower. The giant sword in the air trembled slightly, and the majestic sword intent poured out crazily. The whole Kunlun city was filled with cold sword energy. Your Majesty, please be merciful. Why on earth? Skeleton was scared out of his wits. He stood at the foot of the city and howled in despair. Why? Wang Tianzong smiled and said softly, Nothing. I just don't like you. He paused and then said, Kneel down. The whole city was dead silent. No one knelt down and no one dared to move. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes slightly. The giant sword in the sky shook violently and turned over instantly. Boom. Under Wang Tianzong, the city gate tower collapsed instantly. The 1,000-meter-long giant sword stood upright and rotated in the air, pointing straight at the ground. Wang Tianzong's body was suspended in the air, expressionless, like a god ruling the world. The skeleton's face was full of fear. He bent his waist, bent his knees and unconsciously knelt on the ground. His face was blood red but his knees did not move. He lowered his head and said, Your Majesty, please forgive me. As he knelt down, all the soldiers in front of the city gate finally knelt down. Then it was in the city. One after another. On this day, under the Sword Emperor's giant sword, the whole Kunlun city knelt down. None of the tens of thousands of elites in the city had pride. Wang Tianzong stood in the air and looked at the people of Kunlun City kneeling all over the city. He narrowed his eyes and whispered to himself, This is the posture you should have. His figure flashed and the next second he had carried Wang Xingxiao away. In the wind and snow, the figures of the father and son were getting smaller and smaller, and finally became two black spots. The wind and snow filled Kunlun City. After a long time, the first skeleton who knelt down finally raised his head. At the same time, the 1,000-meter-long giant sword that had not dissipated above fell straight down. No. Skeleton's eyes turned red in an instant. Boom. The condensed giant sword fell to the ground in an instant, and the whole city shook violently. The city wall, the city gate, and countless buildings cracked and collapsed one after another like a landslide in the sky falling. One sword destroyed the city. Chapter 75. Old Master Dongqing asked Li Tianlan to live in Dongqing Rushi's place, but in fact, it was Dongqing Wudi's. The Dongqing clan, which occupied the mountain as the king, was extraordinary. But in fact there were only 6 villas on the big mountain. To put it bluntly, there were 6 families. These 6 families supported the most important branches of the Dongqing clan. No matter from which angle, there was a kind of prosperity like a towering tree, unattainable. Dongqing Wudi's villa was close to the top of the mountain. In terms of height, it was second only to Old Master Dongqing's main villa, and the size was basically the same. Li Tianlan didn't feel anything at first, but when Dongqing Qiuqi took him into a very large bedroom on the third floor and smelled the fresh and elegant fragrance inside, he finally felt something was wrong. Sure enough, Dongqing Qiuqi told him clearly that this was Dongqing Rushi's bedroom and that it was the old master's idea. Li Tianlan was really in a dilemma. At the same time, he couldn't figure out why the old master was so anxious. Looking at his posture, it seemed that he couldn't wait to put Dongqing Rushi in his bed immediately. He was so anxious that Li Tianlan even felt a little absurd. If the Li family was still at its peak, Li Tianlan could understand what the Dongqing clan did, even though it was beneath their dignity. After all, with the status of the Li family at that time, many rich and powerful families would like to be tied to the Li family and use their granddaughters as bargaining chips. Many people would do such a thing. But now it was different. The Li family had long been in decline. Although Li Tianlan had entered the secular world, in the face of the extremely complicated situation in Jianghu state, no one dared to say that the Li family had a chance to rise. No one was even sure whether Li Tianlan could grow up. Under normal circumstances at this time, even if the Dongqing clan would not deny it to deal with him, they would at least quickly cut off relations with him and let the marriage contract be invalid. If there was really such a situation, Li Tianlan could completely understand it and he would not resent anything. Every man for himself would be destroyed by heaven and earth. His identity was a bomb. If he got involved with it, he might face endless hostility. What kind of behemoths were the Prince Group in Kunlun City? How deep-rooted was the Wang family of Beihai? Even if these were not mentioned, which of the family members of the 120,000 soldiers who were wiped out at the border with their father's treason did not hate the Li family to the bone? Now that so many years had passed, no one could be sure where some of the outstanding family members were. Once his identity was exposed, there would be countless opponents in the open and in the dark. No matter how strong the Dongqing clan was, they could not cope with it, and even risked being completely torn apart by the general trend. Their refusal to acknowledge the engagement was, at best, a means of self-protection. It had nothing to do with being noble or despicable. Li Tianlan was too lazy to resent anything. He had long been ready to give up the engagement. But when he came to the Dongqing clan, everything was King wrong. Not only did the Dongqing clan not intend to break the engagement, but they also couldn't wait for him to marry Dongqing Rushi. The old master's attitude was simply impatient. He directly sent him to Dongqing Rushi's bedroom. Li Tianlan felt helpless but also a little lucky. Fortunately, Dongqing Rushi retreated in advance. Otherwise, the old master would really make an absurd move of letting him sleep with Dongqing Rushi tonight. He had just tasted Qin Weibai, and it was time for him to taste the relationship between a man and a woman. At that time, if he really slept with Dongqing Rushi, it was really hard to say whether Li Tianlan could control himself. Li Tianlan instinctively wanted to change the room, but was refused. After Dongqing Qiuqi left, he hesitated and sat on the bed. After calling Qin Weibai, he was in a daze silently. A woman's boudoir should be the type of fresh, romantic, or lovely, but what Li Tianlan could feel here was only coldness and gloom. The light gray walls were full of cold metal texture. The furnishings in the room were simple and monotonous. The bed was big, soft, and comfortable, but from the bedsheet to the bedside table, it was all black without any pattern, looking old-fashioned and solemn. In front of the window was a simple and generous desk, also in a cold color. Several books were placed neatly on the desk. Only a photo frame on the desk could give people a little warm feeling. It seemed to be a family photo many years ago. Dongqing Wudi was holding two very young daughters, smiling freely. A young woman who looked very kind to Li Tianlan put her arms around Dongqing Wudi's neck from the side, looking very happy. Li Tianlan silently looked at the family photo, his body slowly lying on the bed, his expression calm. The elegant fragrance slowly floated into Li Tianlan's nostrils, filling his sense of smell. Different from Qin Weibai's natural richness, and different from Wang Yuetong's fragrance and freshness, it was a very elegant and quiet smell, leaving a deep impression. Li Tianlan closed his eyes. He was a little sleepy, but he couldn't fall asleep for a while. His mind was full of the Dongqing clan. He always felt that whether it was Dongqing Hongguang, Dongqing Wudi, or even Thunder God, there was something wrong with the way they looked at him this time, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. The Dongqing clan was too warm to him, so warm that it even made him a little uneasy. Dongqing Qiuqi was relatively more natural, but that was because she regarded him as her future brother-in-law. Li Tianlan didn't get in touch with other people in the Dongqing clan, but just the few people he had met so far gradually made him feel a little overwhelmed. Kindness? He believed that the Li family's kindness to the Dongqing clan existed, but it was definitely not the main reason why the Dongqing clan was so warm. Any kindness was not enough for the whole Dongqing clan to accept him at the risk of the destruction of the whole clan. If he was just an ordinary person with a declining family, it was understandable that the Dongqing clan was willing to fulfill the engagement because of the kindness of the past. But behind the Li family's loneliness was probably the biggest political storm in Jianghu state in the past 2 decades. If he was with Dongqing Rushi, once his identity was exposed, the whole Dongqing clan would become the first target of countless people. Dongqing Hongguang knew this, but even so, he insisted on marrying his granddaughter to him. With such a resolute attitude, if it was only because of the kindness of the past and the engagement, Li Tianlan would believe it even if he was a fool. What was the purpose behind the series of actions of the Dongqing clan? What value did he have that he hadn't discovered yet? The Dongqing clan, which was unbelievably enthusiastic, was it an enemy or a friend? Li Tianlan's imagination ran wild, and he finally fell asleep in a daze. After an unknown period of time, there was a gentle knock on the door, and Dongqing Qiuqi's gentle voice sounded outside the door. Tianlan, are you awake? Instead of relaxing because of the enthusiasm of the Dongqing clan, Li Tianlan, who was more vigilant, immediately sat up and answered. He washed his face in the bathroom of the bedroom and opened the door. They're still at Grandpa's. It's just the 2 of us at noon. I made lunch. Would you like to have some? Dongqing Qiuqi stood at the door and said softly with a smile. Li Tianlan nodded and said casually, Sister Qiuqi, do you live here too? I just moved out last year and now I live with my wife on this mountain. The villa at the bottom is my home, Dongqing Qiuqi said softly. It could be seen that she had a good relationship with her husband. When she mentioned her husband, she smiled sweetly. What does brother-in-law do? A soldier? Li Tianlan followed Dongqing Qiuqi downstairs and asked with a chuckle. He works in Luojing. He's the mayor of Luojing. He's very capable. Uncle Zhou said that the Zhou family will count on him to take over in the future. Dongqing Qiuqi's gentle and beautiful eyes glanced at Dongqing Qiuqi and said meaningfully, even if it's an alliance marriage, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I have a good relationship with your brother-in-law, right? Li Tianlan was stunned. He knew that she had heard from the old master that he had some resistance to the engagement. Was she here for work? The Zhou family? He knew little about the current 6. The Zhou family seemed to be the backbone of the giant group. Together with the Dongqing clan and the Bai family, they formed the 3 giants of the giant group. All the voices of the giant group were basically made by these 3 giants. Dongqing Qiuqi marrying the heir of the Zhou family was mutually beneficial for both sides. It was also a good ending for Dongqing Qiuqi herself. Luojing was one of the sub-provincial cities in Jianghu state. It had just been applied for a few years ago. The heir of the Zhou family could become the mayor of Luojing and had a bright future. In contrast, although Dongqing Qiuqi was at the same level as her husband, there was no doubt that the eldest son of the Zhou family had a better future. Sister Qiuqi, I agree with you. I'm honored and even a little happy that the Dongqing clan thinks highly of me. But I have a girlfriend. I said I would marry her and I have to do it. Li Tianlan smiled helplessly. Your girlfriend is little Bai? Dongqing Qiuqi suddenly asked. Her tone was playful and a little strange. Li Tianlan suddenly remembered that Qin Weibai had once told him that she was best friends with a core figure of the Dongqing clan. Could it be Dongqing Qiuqi? The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched. He nodded and said again, I will marry her. Dongqing Qiuqi giggled and walked downstairs quickly. Silly boy, even a married lady like me is tempted by a figure like little Bai, let alone a man. It's hard to say whether she will marry you or not. Li Tianlan didn't agree with this, but he wouldn't refute it. He went to the dining room and sat down. Looking at the exquisite dishes on the table, he took a bite and said with a smile, It tastes good. Rushi's cooking is much better than mine. If you like it, let her cook for you in the future. Dongqing Qiuqi tried hard to promote her sister. Li Tianlan looked a little embarrassed. He ate and didn't say anything. Dongqing Qiuqi smiled and stopped talking about this topic. Some things needed to be done slowly. Being too impatient would only be counterproductive. As a senior political official, Dongqing Qiuqi had a perfect grasp of the situation. When you were sleeping, I went downtown to buy you clothes. I didn't know what size you would wear, so I bought one for each size. Try it on later. After dinner, the old master said he would take you to the ancestral hall to burn incense. Dongqing Qiuqi picked up a mouthful of food and said softly. Li Tianlan subconsciously looked at his clothes. He went out in a hurry almost as soon as he got off Qin Weibai's body last night. As a result, Dongqing Wudi was even more anxious than him. He didn't even give him time to change clothes and directly took him to the Dongqing clan. After traveling thousands of miles, he was still in the moon-white silk pajamas. Li Tianlan didn't realize anything before. Now looking at his clothes again, he suddenly felt like a fool. Thank you. He rubbed his nose and didn't refuse. Not everyone had the courage to parade around in his pajamas. Dongqing Qiuqi smiled and didn't speak. Li Tianlan silently lowered his head to eat, but he was thinking about Dongqing Qiuqi's words. The old master would take him to the ancestral hall to burn incense? It seemed that he was really determined to pull him into the Dongqing clan. He frowned slightly. He just felt that it was more and more difficult to see the Dongqing clan's meaning. This was an era where everything was covered by countless appearances and grotesqueness. Good and evil, right and wrong, it seemed that everything could be covered with a seemingly beautiful coat. People's hearts were unpredictable. People's hearts were unpredictable. Why was the Dongqing clan so anxious? These days he was thinking about whether to change the update time. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.